At the very start, there was no Mount Olympus, no ground beneath your feet, no oceans, and no heavens above. Only chaos existed. This wasn't the kind of mess or confusion we might describe nowadays. Chaos was far more ancient than any language could express. Think of it as an enormous, hollow void without any form or path. It held no evil or goodness within it. Chaos simply was. Out of this timeless nothingness, the earliest pieces of our world started to take shape. First appeared Gaia, the broad and stable ground. After her came Tartarus, the frightening, shadowy hole deep under the surface. Following them was Eros, the force of affection, whose energy would spark the birth of all things to come. These beings weren't gods in the way we picture them, but rather the very first simple building blocks of existence. Following these came Nyx, the personification of night, cloaked in darkness so thick that chaos itself appeared to shrink back. Walking alongside her was Erebus, the profound blackness of the world below, dwelling near her in silence. As night and darkness joined forces, they brought forth two offspring: Aether, the pure, crisp atmosphere that divine beings would one day inhale, and Hemera, who became day, fated to pursue her mother endlessly across the heavens. Through this family of mighty, invisible powers who commanded brightness and shadow, the mythical pattern of day and night came into being. Meanwhile, Gaia, the ground itself, stayed active. Her nature was calm yet teeming with energy. She brought forth Uranus from her very essence, creating the massive, star-studded heavens. This made him both her child and her partner. As he stretched above her, blanketing the cosmos, the universe received its initial structure, featuring a rounded ceiling over an infinite level surface. Gaia additionally bore the towering, untamed peaks. She also formed Pontus, the waters, who possessed his own fierce spirit ages before any vessel would cross his domain. Side by side, ground and heaven, Gaia and Uranus, formed the original mighty partnership. The offspring they produced were the Titans, the earliest collection of powerful entities destined to govern all things before Zeus and his kin would rise. 12 Titans existed altogether, half of them male and half female, every single one mighty and linked to the natural world. Among the male Titans were Oceanus, the stream flowing around the entire planet; Hyperion, the ruler of radiance; Coeus, who had an inquisitive mind; Creus, the keeper of stellar bodies; Apetus, who became humanity's ancestor; and Cronus, the most recent-born yet cleverest of all. The female Titans included Thea, the glowing parent of our sun and lunar body; Rhea, destined to mother the divine beings; Themis, who embodied heavenly justice; Mnemosyne, whose memory held all knowledge; Phoebe, radiating with brilliance; and Tethys, guardian of the ocean's pure currents. Yet Gaia bore additional offspring, and these were frightening and horrific. Among the earliest were the Cyclopes, Brontes, Steropes, and Arges. Every one possessed just one blazing eyeball positioned at the center of their brow. These beings excelled at metalworking, crafted bolts of lightning, possessed tremendous might, and showed no terror before any immortal or titan. Following them arrived the Hecatonchires, known as the 100-armed giants. Their size was immense and their appearance terrifying, each one sporting 50 separate heads and 100 limbs. Whenever rage overtook them, their strength could make the whole universe tremble. Uranus, who ruled the heavens, felt fear upon witnessing these monstrous young ones. Feelings of disgrace and dread filled him when he looked at their bizarre and formidable forms. Therefore, he forced them backward into Gaia's depths, pushing them far below the surface. He imprisoned them beneath countless stone layers and misery. Gaia moaned in agony, sensing their burden within her. The ground, formerly dignified and nurturing, now experienced suffering with each moment. This very suffering sparked her desire to seek vengeance. However, that tale belongs to a different moment. Right now, simply keep in mind that at the dawn of time, before regulations or instruments existed, the universe was formed through strength, affection, and suffering. While chaos brought forth the initial forms, it was Gaia, the magnificent mother, who provided them with a home. The relationship between Gaia and Uranus, earth and sky, was the first great marriage in the universe. It wasn't a wedding with fancy ceremonies, but a natural and necessary pairing. The sky covered the earth, holding her tightly night after night. Their children were the Titans and other powerful beings, but their union also brought a lot of sadness. Uranus, though he was powerful and large, was a jealous and fearful father. He saw his monstrous children not as strong, but as a danger to his rule. He looked at the Cyclopes and the 100-handed giants with disgust, not pride. With quick and cruel action, he forced them back into Gaia's womb, deep inside the earth where no light could reach and no sounds could be heard. Gaia groaned under their weight. It wasn't just the pain of carrying them inside her again, but the feeling of being betrayed by her husband, the sky, who should have loved their children as she did. Every night, Uranus came down to her, pressing the heavens against the earth, ignoring her pain and her sadness. She couldn't take it anymore. So, from her own body, she created a weapon. It wasn't made of metal, because metal hadn't been invented yet. It was a huge sickle made of hard flint, as jagged as the truth and as sharp as revenge. Then she went to her Titan sons, her first and strongest children, and told them about her suffering. "Your father has hurt me," she said. "He has trapped your brothers. He has silenced the mother who gave you life. Which one of you will help me?" One by one, they backed away, afraid of their father's power. Only Cronus, the youngest, the smartest, and the most patient one, stepped forward. "I will do it," he said. "Give me the weapon." So Gaia planned a trap. She waited for Uranus to come down, as he always did, lying on top of her in the darkness. From the shadows, Cronus appeared. With a firm hand and without hesitating, he swung the sickle at his father. The sky trembled with Uranus's scream as the blade cut him deeply, taking away his power. Cronus threw the bloody part of his father into the sea. From the red foam that bubbled up on the waves, a new being was born. It was a figure so beautiful it was almost scary. From that white foam came Aphrodite, the goddess of love and desire, who would later cause great trouble for kings and empires. She walked onto the shore at Cyprus, looking radiant and calm, not affected by the violent way she was created. But Gaia's revenge wasn't over. From the drops of blood that fell on the earth, other creatures came to life. The Furies, who were covered in shadows and sought revenge, would chase anyone who broke a promise or hurt their family. The giants, who would one day fight against the gods, were also born. And so were the Melii, who were nymphs of the ash trees and protected the wild and ancient places. Uranus, hurt and without his throne, disappeared into the sky, leaving the world to his children. Before he left, he was said to have made a final curse that would be remembered forever. "Just as my son overthrew me, he will be overthrown by his own son." It wasn't a new prophecy, but something Gaia had already thought of, and Cronus heard it clearly. He took over the sky throne and became very powerful. But from the moment he did, he started to worry about what his father had said. This was the end of Uranus's rule, the first king of the universe, and the beginning of the age of the Titans. But a new storm was already starting to form. Following Uranus's departure and the cessation of the heavens pressing upon the ground, the planet seemed reborn. The Titans, liberated from their father's dominion, rose proudly. Cronus, the final-born yet most astute, assumed command of everything. His leadership style differed from his father's tyrannical and disorderly approach. Rather, he governed with a watchful and distrustful spirit. The curved blade employed to vanquish Uranus became concealed, perhaps interred within the soil or cast into the waters. Though people recalled the weapon, nobody witnessed it thereafter, resembling a buried mystery. Cronus had rescued his mother from torment and his brothers and sisters from confinement. Yet from the instant he claimed the universe's crown, anxiety plagued him regarding the prediction that had driven his uprising. His expiring father's statement continuously replayed within his thoughts, declaring that he likewise would face defeat through his personal child. Consequently, Cronus married, following royal custom. His selection was his sister Rhea, a Titaness celebrated for her tender power and profound understanding, despite her identity eventually becoming linked with sorrow. United, they presided throughout an epoch that subsequent storytellers named a golden period. This represented a moment when people, freshly formed, existed peacefully devoid of hardship, frigid seasons, or conflicts. The ground yielded nourishment absent any labor. This preceded monarchs commanding forces, prior to communities erecting barriers, and before worship occurred in sanctuaries. Fairness existed naturally within existence, and securing doors proved unnecessary. However, everyone understands that such tranquility cannot endure. Before long, Rhea began bearing offspring. With every fresh infant, Cronus recalled his father's malediction. He acted immediately. The instant Rhea presented each newborn, beginning with Hestia, followed by Demeter, then Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, he stretched his jaws broadly and consumed them entirely. No trace remained, no weeping, no crib. Everyone simply knew they had vanished, concealed within their father's belly, resembling seeds planted underground during wintertime. He informed Rhea this was unavoidable, that he refused to suffer Uranus's destiny, and his position required protection. Despite Rhea's dignity and strength, she proved powerless to prevent him. Tears flowed from her eyes, yet her weeping accomplished nothing. 5 births occurred, and 5 occasions she witnessed her offspring stolen by her spouse's terror. When the 6th pregnancy arrived, she resolved to take action. Sensing the infant stirring internally, she avoided Cronus completely. She fled toward Crete's island, where peaks soared high and caverns plunged deep. Hidden among herders and nature spirits, she delivered her final male child, Zeus. From his initial breath, Rhea recognized his exceptional nature. His wailing resonated so powerfully it disturbed the trees. His vision activated before his inaugural inhalation. When he grasped her finger, his clutch matched destiny's firmness. For deceiving Cronus, Rhea enveloped a boulder in infant garments and presented it to him, her limbs trembling. He gulped it hastily, believing the menace eliminated. Meanwhile, on Mount Ida, infant Zeus received secret nurturing. The Curetes shielded him, fighters who performed dances and struck their protective shields to mask his crying sounds. The goat Amalthea nourished him, whose dairy made him remarkably powerful. While Zeus matured, the tempest destined to eventually transform the planet likewise intensified. Presently, the Cronus period persisted. The firmament remained cloudless, the soil stayed verdant, and the Titans commanded from their seats, unaware of approaching difficulties. Yet deep within Cronus, 5 offspring awaited in obscurity. Remotely, a secretly born child observed the celestial bodies and awaited his moment. Within Mount Ida's concealed regions, where atmosphere grew sparse and breezes murmured ancient mysteries, Zeus developed into manhood. Secretly nurtured, distant from his father's observation. His education about existence originated not from writ materials, but from elevated peak stillness, foliage's sounds, and tales his protectors shared beside flames. He consumed milk from the remarkable goat Amalthea, who had sustained him since infancy. From her horn, which fractured accidentally or symbolically, emerged the cornucopia, representing infinite nourishment and abundance. Upon Amalthea's demise, Zeus positioned her covering among the stars as a constellation for her tribute, and her remembrance joined the firmament he'd eventually command. Yet his purpose wasn't peaceful celestial observation. Magnificent accomplishments awaited him, and he sensed an approaching revolution's burden. Throughout his growth, Gaia personally started paying attention. She recalled Cronus's betrayal, the suffering of her confined sons, the 100-armed giants, plus the Cyclopes remaining buried profoundly in Tartarus. Her retribution against Uranus hadn't concluded, it had simply been delayed. Using primordial language, she communicated reality to Zeus through his sleeping visions. During wakefulness, she revealed his necessary actions. Initially, she guided him toward Medes, wisdom's titaness who possessed remarkable intelligence and championed the forthcoming era. Through Medes' assistance, Zeus formulated a strategy. For defeating Cronus, the Titans' monarch and time's ruler, mere strength proved insufficient. Cleverness became essential. Zeus returned to his father's dwelling disguised. Through Medes' aid, he provided Cronus a particular beverage blended within wine, simultaneously sugary and acrid. The concoction disturbed the ancient Titan's digestive system, and ultimately, through a thunderous moan, Cronus expelled the offspring he'd consumed ages past. They emerged not as infants, but as completely developed and formidable deities prepared for combat. Hestia arrived initially, the goddess governing hearth and household. Afterward, Demeter, governing harvests. Then magnificent Hera, dignified and possessing penetrating vision. Subsequently Hades, commanding the deceased, and lastly Poseidon, controlling the waters. The 6 brothers and sisters assembled collectively for their inaugural occasion, bonded and confronting the seat that had maintained them in blackness. They wouldn't disregard what had transpired. Nevertheless, Cronus possessed supporters. The Titans rallied beside him, his brothers and sisters assembling on Mount Othrys, the southern ancient authority center. Oceanus remained uninvolved, perhaps from excessive age or excessive wisdom for familial disputes, yet the remaining ones, Coeus, Crius, Hyperion, and Iapetus, readied for conflict. This initiated the conflict that storytellers labeled the Titanomachy, the magnificent confrontation between Titans and Olympians. A conflict that rattled the firmament and fractured the ground. Throughout 10 years, combat persisted without a victor. The heavens darkened with tempests and haze. Thundering and flames resonated through the peaks, and the youthful planet beneath observed fearfully as its commanders battled for dominance. The Titans maintained their territory on Mount Othrys, whereas Zeus and his brothers and sisters struggled from Mount Olympus, a peak untouched by warfare previously. The conflicts proved brutal and unceasing. Lightning bolts descended, and enormous surges obliterated islands. Fire mountains discharged flames, and gusts shrieked. Throughout an extended period, the conflict appeared endless, with neither faction capable of triumph. Yet Gaia, perpetually observing, understood that for altering the result, they required assistance from those confined for such duration. She counseled Zeus once more. For victory, he must descend into Tartarus and liberate his monstrous relatives, the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires, whom Cronus had maintained in restraints from terror. Accompanied by his brothers and sisters, Zeus shattered the netherworld's portals and released the mighty entities. The Cyclopes, appreciative in combatry, bestowed Zeus his most formidable armament, the lightning bolt, symbolizing firmament and tempests. They granted Poseidon the three-pronged spear, which he'd employ for controlling waters. They gave Hades a darkness cap, making its bearer unseen. The Hecatoncheires, the Titans possessing 100 appendages, ultimately entered combat. They hurled peaks resembling pebbles and assaulted the Titans bearing ancient beings' liberated fury. Through these fresh confederates, the conflict began shifting toward the Olympians. They battled bearing strength no Titan could vanquish. Cronus, dignified and declining surrender, battled until the absolute conclusion. Yet the prediction perpetually materialized. The Titans experienced defeat. Individually, they were forced backward and cast from the planet's elevated locations. Zeus refrained from executing them. Rather, he confined them precisely as his father had accomplished. They were cast profoundly into Tartarus, bound in restraints fashioned by the hundred-armed giants, and secured behind bronze barriers that would never corrode or fracture. Merely a handful escaped this destiny. Prometheus and Epimetheus, who had aligned with the deities, and Themis, who recognized the immortals' governance as righteous, were exempted. This marked the Titans' sovereignty's conclusion. The firmament brightened, and the planet, harmed by flames and conflict, commenced mending. The seat now belonged to Zeus, not through birthright nobility, but through his might, intelligence, and destiny's achievement. Still, even while claiming the heavens' authority, Cronus's malediction's shadow persisted, resembling an ancient melody's reverberation. Since authority, once claimed, requires perpetual safeguarding, and no commander, whether divine or mortal, achieves genuine security. Following the conflict's termination and the planet's renewed quietness, the triumphant stood amongst wreckage. The Titans remained restrained in Tartarus's depths, and their lamentations disappeared in the shadowy chasm from which no noise could break free. The previous lifestyle had vanished. Yet with warfare concluded, the immortals faced a fresh and possibly greater challenge: governing methods. Conquering conflict can occur through flames and fury, yet commanding demands sound reasoning, tolerance, and organization. The planet stretched vast and untamed, filled with forces both familiar and mysterious. No single deity could command everything. Zeus, presently the immortals' commander, stood at this fresh epic's core. Despite not being the initial offspring, he possessed supreme strength, intelligence, and promptness when action became necessary. Yet the cosmos's ancient regulations didn't grant him total authority. Two siblings existed, equally strengthened from combat. Poseidon had transformed waters foamy through his rage, and Hades had utilized the blackness cap and traversed conflicts unseen. They'd similarly struggled, ventured dangerously, and sacrificed things. The universe's throne couldn't exclusively belong to Zeus, otherwise additional warfare might ignite this occurrence between brothers. Therefore the trio, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, assembled and cast lots for dividing the planet. They avoided arguments or battles, they permitted destiny to determine. This wasn't mere recreation. Casting lots represented a solemn action, directed by identical forces that had communicated through Gaia and determined the Titanomachy's result. They tossed the bones and anticipated. Upon landing, the planet separated into three magnificent domains. Zeus obtained the firmament, the expansive heavens and atmosphere between celestial bodies and peaks. He transformed into thunder and precipitation's ruler, tempests and vapors' commander, and Olympus's monarch. His utterance would resonate in thundering, his fury would manifest in lightning strikes, and the eagle transformed into his courier, soaring, elevated above everything. Poseidon obtained the waters, which stretched profoundly, perpetually shifting and brimming with enigmas and beasts. He claimed dominance over oceans, waterways, and every fountain emerging from the ground. Through his three-pronged weapon, he could fracture precipices and transform surges ferocious or tranquil. Beneath the currents, he constructed a residence of coral and precious metal. Present, he commanded not merely marine life and flows, but primordial aquatic beings, resembling ocean serpents and enormous creatures. Hades obtained the netherworld, the deceased's territory. This wasn't a reward Numerous would have desired, yet Hades acknowledged it calmly. He governed the shadowy domain with solemn respectability. His domain remained concealed beneath the ground where sunlight never illuminated. Present, he transformed into spirits of the deceased's commander, mortal soul's arbiter, and treasure's protector buried profoundly underground, resembling precious stones and minerals. Despite people fearing his identity and solely mentioning it when required, Hades maintained equilibrium between existence and demise. Legend stated he never violated regulations he was destined to maintain. The ground itself, Gaia's personal form, remained as everyone's shared location. The peaks belonged to nobody. Mortals and spirits wandered the meadows, and woodlands flourished wildly absent a solitary commander. It represented neutral territory where immortals could traverse and mortals could observe them, yet additionally a location where ambitions developed and where destiny would persistently shape occurrences. Consequently, the planet was arranged: firmament, waters, and netherworld. The three siblings, presently monarchs of their personal territories, vowed against mutual conflict, preventing planetary fracture again. They erected their seats and assembled their adherents. On Mount Olympus, elevated beyond the vapors, Zeus conducted an immortals' assembly. Present alongside him remained his sisters: Hera, dignified and keen as wintertime frost; Demeter, whose footsteps generated springtime appearance; and Hestia, representing flame in every dwelling's hearth. Additional ones arrived, both fresh and ancient. Athena emerged from intelligence and combat, Apollo radiant and possessing futurescite ability, Artemis silent and rapid, Ares bearing bloodstains, Hermes swift in physique and intellect, Hephaestus, who limped yet possessed brilliant craftsmanship, and Aphrodite, whose grin could topple monarchs. This initiated a fresh period, the Olympian epoch. Yet despite seats being established and territories being separated, the planet wouldn't maintain peacefulness extensively. The immortals, possessing all their authority, remained brimming with arrogance, affection, and fury. Plus, the mortals presently beginning to manifest across territories would possess their personal tales, their personal conflicts, and their personal misery. The firmament had been conquered, yet tranquility proves challenging when immortals command. Following conflict's haze clearing and the planet growing sunny again, Mount Olympus transformed into a fresh and remarkable court's residence. The Titans had commanded from Mount Othrys southward, which represented a severe and primordial location. Yet Olympus, northward, stretched even more elevated. Its summit remained shrouded in vapors and legends. The peak wasn't merely a geographical point. It represented a unique location where firmament and ground converged, where mortal territory concluded and immortal territory commenced. Here Zeus, who had secured the heavens through both destiny and combat, assembled the fresh immortal collection. The Olympian assembly differed from mortal kingdoms. No paved routes approached it, nobody announcing guests, and no forces protecting it. The immortals required no barriers for safeguarding. The atmosphere itself formed their frontier, excessively elevated for mortals' respiration. Legend stated that on Olympus, no tempests existed, no frozen precipitation, and nothing ever deteriorated. Its chambers were constructed from marble and vapors. Its ceilings received decoration from starlight, and its corridors stretched so broadly that breezes could flow through freely. Present, the immortals manifested in their complete, formidable forms, radiating and magnificent, more vigorous than anything upon the ground beneath. At Olympus's absolute summit resides Zeus, immortals and mortals' sovereign, upon a thundering seat. He commanded not merely through his tremendous might, but through destiny's determination and conflict's recollection. His utterance resembled distant thundering. His vision could penetrate beyond vapors and temporality. Within his grasp, he possessed the lightning bolt, a cyclops present, which symbolized his rapid and ultimate judgment. Yet even he didn't command entirely independently. Surrounding him existed additional immortals, each one significant in the fresh planetary arrangement. Hera resided alongside him, not merely as his spouse, but as a monarch bearing her personal authority. She represented marriage's goddess, monarchs, and childbearing, and additionally represented a wronged female's fury. Dignified and unforgiving, Hera recalled every insult, and her possessiveness would subsequently affect both immortals' and mortals' existences. Her crown was not bestowed upon her. She acquired it through treachery and Olympus's sacred commitments. Following was Demeter, grain and vegetation's goddess. Wherever she traversed, the terrain became productive and kernels commenced sprouting. Her manifestation delivered harvests and prosperity, and absent her, the meadows would stretch barren. She didn't remain elevated on Olympus alongside the thundering and marble, but frequently traversed among populations beneath, observing cultivators and mothers who supplicated to her during mourning. She possessed greater age and quietness than numerous additional immortals, yet nobody questioned her authority. Afterward existed Hestia, the hearth's goddess. She represented Cronus and Rhea's initial offspring and the final liberated from her father's digestive system. She didn't request magnificent sanctuaries, celebrated legends, conflicts, or romantic partners. She maintained the eternal blaze at Olympus's center and observed every dwelling and fireplace on ground. Her authority proved gentle yet perpetually present, since provided a flame burned within a residence. Hestia existed present likewise. The younger immortals arrived afterward, some emerging on Olympus and additional ones through unusual methods. Athena represented the earliest among them. She wasn't delivered from a mother, but from intelligence itself. Upon Zeus consuming Medes, terrified that her offspring would exceed him in might, he believed the difficulty was resolved. Yet Medes didn't perish. She existed within him, murmuring and formulating strategies. One occasion, Zeus experienced a horrific headache. Through a strike to his cranium, Athena leaped outward, completely developed, attired in bronze armor and grasping a weapon. Her vision remained clear and penetrating. She transformed into intelligence, tactics, and righteous conflicts goddess. She represented a fighter who possessed no patience for nonsense. Apollo and Artemis followed subsequently. They represented twins, delivered to the Titaness Leto, who had to wander throughout an extended duration to discover a birthing location. No territory would assist her since Hera's fury proved magnificent and vindictive. Ultimately, the drifting island Delos sheltered her, and in the present she bore her offspring. Apollo, possessing his golden locks, transformed into radiance, prophecy, melody, and restoration's god. His sister, Artemis, swift and silvery, represented hunting, untamed creatures, and moonlight's goddess. United, they symbolized a fresh immortal generation who proved energetic, luminous, and intimately linked to the mortal planet. Afterward arrived Ares, combat and slaughter's god, Zeus and Hera's offspring, yet not cherished by either parent. He possessed strength yet lacked discipline, brimming with fury absent reasoning. Despite his identity being dreaded, he wasn't frequently venerated. Conflict pursued him constantly, and he adored its disorder, yet cleverness and intelligence frequently vanquished him. His antithesis was Hephaestus, the forge's lame god, a craftwork and flame master. Legend states he either emerged from Hera independently or Zeus flung him from Olympus. He discovered comfort in metalworking, fashioning remarkable items through his hammer and flame. He manufactured armor, residences, and even mechanical beings. Despite being limping and contorted, he ranked among the most crucial immortals. Aphrodite, magnificence and longing's goddess, wasn't delivered but emerged from aquatic froth generated when Uranus's separated flesh was cast into waters. She ascended from surges at Cyprus, as magnificent as she proved hazardous. Affection, desire, possessiveness, and catastrophe pursued her constantly. Even Zeus couldn't completely dominate her. She could mesmerize immortals and mortals through merely a glance. Though she grinned frequently, her grin perpetually carried repercussions. Hermes, the deceiver and courier, represented the final of this initial immortal collection. He represented Zeus and the nymph Maia's offspring, and he could traverse rapidly between realms. He possessed winged footwear on his feet and a playful grin. On his birth occasion, he pilfered Apollo's livestock, performed a melody for concealing his actions, and rendered himself valuable before he could even ambulate. He transformed into the immortals' courier, souls' director, and thieves' and wanderers' sponsor. Wherever Hermes ventured, frontiers vanished. This represented the Olympian assembly, a collection not of flawless entities, but of formidable, imperfect, and remarkable forces. They disputed like brothers and sisters, selected positions in mortal disagreements, experienced romantic feelings, betrayed one another, conducted minor quarrels, and administered divine fairness. Yet most significantly, they commanded from Olympus. They observed the planet beneath and molded it according to their desires. The Titans' period had concluded, and replacing it arrived a period of tales regarding immortals who traversed among populations, champions emerging from their partnerships, and a planet forever altered by divine hands. The planet presently possessed its commanders, yet tranquility, perpetually, proved a fragile thing, and destiny hadn't yet delivered its ultimate declaration. Ages preceding people constructing marble municipalities or inscribing supplications upon rock, no mortals existed upon the ground. The immortals commanded independently, possessing their assemblies on Mount Olympus and their vast territories. The planet beneath them stretched verdant and untamed, brimming with creatures and silent peaks. Yet no appendages existed for cultivating territory, no utterances for performing to celestial bodies, and no flame for maintaining warmth during evenings. Prometheus, a titan from ancient occasions, initially conceived creating mortals. He wasn't a Cronus confederate and never ranked among the titans restrained in Tartarus. Throughout the titans' conflict, Prometheus had aligned with Zeus, not from affection toward him, but since he could perceive futurity. He possessed prophetic talent and recognized the conflict's conclusion. Prometheus's identity signified forethought, which proved an appropriate designation for him. He represented Epimetheus's brother, whose identity signified afterthought, and the twin brothers proved remarkably different. Whereas Epimetheus acted hastily and regretted subsequently, Prometheus contemplated ahead, organized meticulously, and challenged every regulation, including those from the immortals' monarch himself. He represented a combination of Titan and Olympian, ancient planet and fresh, an entity of logic in a cosmos commanded by emotion and authority. He represented the individual who initially fashioned humankind. Certain tales claim he constructed them from mud beside a waterway, employing his digits for molding the soil into bodies and his respiration for bestowing them existence. Alternative tales claim he fashioned them resembling the immortals, standing vertically and capable of contemplation. Yet regardless of how it transpired, the initial mortals proved feeble. They possessed delicate epidermis, were sluggish, and possessed no talons, fangs, pelts, or flame. They were unclothed and frigid, trembling during wintertime and incapable of protecting themselves against untamed creatures. Prometheus observed them and experienced compassion for them. He approached Olympus and requested a present for humankind, something for assisting them survive and exceed creatures. Yet Zeus declined. He perceived mortals as hazards, not commitments. The immortals' monarch had recently claimed his seat and worried about fresh authorities ascending. Permit them existence, he declared, yet permit them fear. Permit them to recognize their location stretches beneath the immortals. Flame, he declared, belonged exclusively to the immortals. Hestia's hearth's flame, Zeus's lightning bolt, and Hephaestus's forge weren't for mortal appendages. Yet Prometheus, who proved obstinate and equitable, didn't surrender. Secretly, he ascended to the firmament, pilfered a blaze from Hephaestus's forge, and concealed it within a hollow vegetation stalk. He transported it downward from Olympus and presented it to mortals. For the inaugural occasion, a flame crackled beneath celestial bodies. Vapor ascended upward from vegetation. Illumination forced away obscurity. Through flame, mortals obtained warmth, protection, prepared nourishment, minerals, communication, and crafts. Humankind, previously frigid and silent, commenced constructing. Through flame, they additionally commenced challenging the immortals. Zeus didn't require extended duration for discovering the theft. He experienced fury. For punishing humankind, he commanded the immortals to fashion a present that truly represented a malediction. Hephaestus constructed a female of flawless magnificence from mud. Aphrodite bestowed charm upon her. Hermes granted her a shrewd intellect. Athena attired her in silvery garments. Her identity was Pandora, signifying all-gifted. She received a sealed container, subsequently labeled a box, containing all the planet's sorrows: illness, difficult labor, misery, insanity, possessiveness, and mortality. Epimetheus, perpetually foolish, welcomed her into his residence, despite Prometheus having cautioned him against it. When Pandora, being remarkably inquisitive, the ultimate present from the immortals, unsealed the container, all the evils soared outward into the planet, resembling vapor from a flame. Humankind, who had existed peacefully for a brief duration, presently had to confront numerous difficulties. They experienced hunger, they battled conflicts, and they matured. Exclusively, hope remained within the container. Certain people claim it occurred accidentally, additional ones claim it occurred intentionally, a tiny illumination in all the obscurity. Prometheus's punishment remained forthcoming. For challenging Olympus, Zeus had him restrained to a peak at the planet's boundary. Certain people claim it represented the Caucasus Peaks. Additional ones claim it represented a location presently vanished to legend. He was bound with indestructible restraints. Daily, an eagle, either emerged from Typhon or dispatched by Zeus, would arrive and consume his liver. Nightly, his liver would regenerate, and the subsequent morning, the torture would commence again. He possessed immortality, therefore he couldn't perish from the torment. He tolerated this throughout numerous generations, extensively after kingdoms appeared and vanished, and extensively after mortals disregarded the immortals who fashioned them. Still, even in restraints, Prometheus didn't experience regret for his actions. He recognized a mystery, a reality that Zeus feared tremendously, that someday the immortals' monarch would face overthrow, not through a tool or a revolution, but through his personal offspring. This understanding safeguarded Prometheus, since Zeus couldn't eliminate him absent initially discovering the female who would bear this offspring's identity. Consequently, the Titan anticipated, restrained yet not vanquished, as mortals ignited flames in obscurity and narrated tales of the individual who had dared pilfering from the immortals. The immortals, possessing all their magnificence, weren't the exclusive entities who molded the planet. Upon the ground beneath Olympus, humankind struggled, expanded, and collapsed repeatedly. Their existences proved brief contrasted with the immortals' extended existences, yet they continued generating differences. Despite Zeus commanding the firmament and Poseidon dominating the waters, mortal actions filled the ground with both beneficial and harmful things. The storytellers who arrived subsequently would retrospectively examine this extensive voyage and perceive not merely one mortal type but numerous. Each emerged during a different moment, designated by the beneficial and harmful things the immortals accomplished. Hesiod, a cultivator and storyteller, initially documented these different epochs, separating mortal history into 5 periods: golden, silver, bronze, heroic, and iron. Every epoch proved inferior to the preceding one, excluding one. Initially existed the golden period, and it differed from any moment that followed. It occurred throughout Cronus's governance, preceding the immortals fearing revolution, and preceding the ground recognized iron or combat. Throughout those occasions, mortals existed resembling immortals, absent suffering, advanced age, or difficult labor. The ground furnished abundant nourishment absent anybody required to cultivate it, presenting harvests throughout all seasons. No requirement existed for regulations or tools, no requirement for monarchs or currency. These initial mortals never sensed hunger, illness, or misery. Upon their moment arriving for perishing, they didn't endure, but departed as though they were sleeping. Their essences transformed into beneficial and observant protectors, wandering the planet and safeguarding fairness and tranquility. They existed an existence of flawless concord, and it represented the nearest any mortal would ever reach a flawless planet. Yet the Golden Period concluded, as all beneficial things accomplish. Upon Cronus descending and Zeus ascending to authority, the Silver Period commenced. It represented a moment of reduced magnificence and populations who weren't as dignified. These mortals expanded elevated and powerful, existing extended existences, yet they weren't as intelligent or restrained as the Golden Period's populations. They remained as offspring for 100 years, pampered and uninformed, and afterward matured to transform into aggressive and presumptuous mortals who didn't respect the immortals or acknowledge their regulations. They didn't construct sanctuaries, provide offerings, or honor Olympus's rules. Consequently, Zeus eliminated them. Their essences didn't transform into protectors, but disappeared into the netherworld, pale and disregarded. They represented a population that vanished owing to their arrogance and disobedience, a reflection of the immortals' personal terrors. Afterward arrived the Bronze Period, emerged from ash vegetation, the identical vegetation employed for manufacturing weapons and protective barriers. These weren't tender mortals. They represented fighters, powerful and resilient. Legend stated their physiques were constructed from bronze. Their residences, instruments, and even their spirits appeared constructed from identical minerals. They existed for combat and perished in it, saturating the planet with gore and devastation. They proved frightening for observing, yet not malevolent, merely propelled by combat's sounds. They didn't construct municipalities, compose poems, or manufacture sculptures. Upon perishing, they abandoned exclusively fractured weapons and barren meadows. Even the immortals didn't lament them. They descended into Hades absent anybody recalling them. Yet not all transformation proves detrimental. From the gore and haze of the Bronze Period, a brief yet luminous phase surfaced, the Heroic Period. It represented a unique moment, not belonging to the deterioration, but an instant of magnificence preceding the descent. These mortals exceeded those who preceded or succeeded them. They represented the demigods, immortals, and mortals' offspring. They constructed municipalities, navigated the waters, and generated their celebrated identities. This represented Perseus and Heracles' period, of Theseus and Atalanta, of Jason and the Argonauts, of Hector, Achilles, and Odysseus. They battled magnificent conflicts against beasts, foreign monarchs, and ultimately against one another at Troy. Numerous among them perished youthfully, and numerous additional ones were disregarded. Yet their tales persisted, narrated in melodies and inscribed on rock, in magnificent poems and supplications. Certain among them received a unique location in the Blessed Isles, distant across the ocean, where champions exist in tranquility and sunlight perpetually. The Heroic Period didn't endure extensively, yet while it accomplished, it illuminated the planet. Afterward arrived the epoch that Hesiod labeled his personal, the Iron Period, where we continue existing. This represents a moment of misery and difficult labor, a planet that has matured ancient and exhausted. Mortals presently labor from morning until evening, cultivating kernels in challenging soil, nurturing offspring throughout conflicts and starvation, and maturing ancient with suffering and terror. Throughout the Iron Period, friendships and familial connections fracture effortlessly. Fairness no longer receives respect. Numerous falsehoods exist, commitments aren't maintained, and the immortals, if they continue observing, accomplish so in quietness. Throughout this epoch, mortals construct elevated structures yet disregard their forebears. They pursue currency and authority and eliminate the woodlands that previously sustained them. It represents a struggle's epoch, and legend states that someday, even this shall conclude. Someday, the immortals shall reverse their backs entirely. Someday, Zeus shall position downward his lightning bolt, and humankind shall vanish resembling vapor in the breeze. Still, the Iron Period persists. Mortals continue constructing, continue anticipating, and continue narrating tales of a moment when mortals were golden and immortals traversed among them. Perhaps that anticipation, despite being tiny, represents the individual present Zeus didn't reclaim when Pandora unsealed the container. Throughout the period separating immortals' epoch and mortals' epoch, a generation of mortals existed who differed from those preceding or succeeding them. These represented mortals emerged not merely from mud, but from immortals' gore and mortal females' interiors, molded by both Olympus and ground. These represented the champions. Their existences proved brief, and their destinies frequently proved severe, yet their identities would receive remembrance perpetually. Among the initial and most magnificent of these champions was Perseus, who eliminated beasts, initiated royal lineages, and represented the initial of all champions. Perseus's tale doesn't commence with combat, but through a prediction and terror. His mother, Danae, represented an Argus princess, King Acrisius's daughter. The monarch, resembling numerous monarchs of his period, feared things he couldn't dominate. An oracle cautioned him that his daughter would bear a male child who would eliminate him. Predictions resembling this, in legends and in actual existence, can't be altered. Consequently, Acrisius accomplished what monarchs frequently accomplish when they're frightened of reality. He attempted eliminating the difficulty. He imprisoned Danae within a bronze structure beneath the ground, a chamber that was isolated from everybody. Yet the immortals, as they frequently accomplished, ridiculed mortal schemes. Zeus, within the appearance of a golden precipitation shower, infiltrated through the barrier's fractures and visited Danae in her isolated chamber. From this joining, Perseus emerged. Upon Acrisius' discovery regarding the infant, he didn't attempt eliminating him straightforwardly, since even merciless monarchs fear the immortal's fury. Rather, he positioned Danae and her infant male child within a wooden container and cast them into the waters, anticipating that Poseidon or Fortune would generate their drowning. Yet the waters prove as unpredictable as destiny. The container didn't submerge. It drifted across the shadowy surges to Seriphos' island, where a compassionate fisherman named Dictys discovered it. He sheltered them and nurtured Perseus as his personal male child. The youth matured to stretch, elevated and powerful, possessing a monarch's appearance and a tempest's vision. Yet tranquility doesn't endure extensively for those possessing a magnificent destiny. Seriphos' commander, King Polydex, perceived Danae's magnificence and desired her for himself. Perseus, presently a youthful male, confronted the monarch for safeguarding his mother. Polydex, avoiding attacking the male child straightforwardly, employed a shrewd deception rather than strength. He declared a fraudulent matrimony. Certain people claimed a female named Hippodamia and requested all the males on the island to deliver him a present. Perseus, who possessed no precious metal or equines, proudly declared that he would deliver the monarch a considerably superior reward: Medusa's cranium, the mortal gorgon whose glance could transform people to rock. This represented a merciless assignment, and Polydex recognized it. No male who had ever pursued Medusa had returned. She represented one among 3 Gorgon sisters who emerged from primordial aquatic immortals. They proved repulsive and possessed appendages. Their craniums were shrouded in serpents, and their vision was malignant. Exclusively, Medusa was mortal, her sisters were immortal, and it proved hazardous approaching any among them. Yet the immortals, who observed the planet with curiosity, determined to assist Perseus. Athena, who emerged from her father's cranium and never disregarded an offense, Medusa had previously represented a maiden within her sanctuary prior to Poseidon's actions contaminating it, bestowed her protective barrier to the youthful champion. It was burnished, resembling a reflective surface. Therefore, he could observe the Gorgon's reflection absent encountering her vision. Hermes, who proved rapid and shrewd, bestowed him a curved weapon and winged footwear for soaring. He additionally instructed him in discovering the Grey sisters who shared one eyeball between them and recognized the confidential route to the Gorgon's residence. Perseus, employing his intelligence, pilfered their eyeballs and compelled them, revealing the confidential information. They informed him regarding the nature spirits who possessed the unique items he would require: Hades' cap, which generated the wearer unseen, a supernatural container for retaining the Gorgon's cranium, and the geographical point's position beyond the ocean where it perpetually remained shadowy and the Gorgons slumbered among primordial rocks. Possessing these divine presents, Perseus soared above the waters and wasteland until he arrived at the ground's boundary. He discovered them slumbering, Medusa and her sisters, within a shadowy woodland encircled by the sculptures of those who had attempted confronting them previously. Perseus didn't attempt observing them straightforwardly. Consequently, grasping Athena's protective barrier before him, he traversed backward, pace by pace, until he remained positioned above the slumbering Gorgon. Through one rapid swing, he severed her cranium. From her gore, Pegasus, the winged equine, and Chrysaor, the fighter possessing a golden weapon, emerged. They represented Poseidon's offspring, emerging at mortality's instant. As Medusa's sisters shrieked and assaulted the atmosphere, Perseus vanished, concealed by the obscurity's cap. The action was accomplished. He returned through an extended route, his reward burdensome within the container, its authority continuing powerful. Throughout his journey, he traversed Ethiopia's coastline, where the aquatic immortal had dispatched a beast for punishing King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia for excessive arrogance. Their daughter, Andromeda, was restrained to a boulder as a sacrifice. Perseus perceived her magnificence and purity, eliminated the beast by transforming it to rock through the Gorgon's cranium, and declared her as his spouse. She would journey with him toward the westward direction and transform into his offspring's mother. Upon ultimately returning to Seriphos, Polydex ridiculed his narrative. Consequently, Perseus extracted the severed cranium from the container. The monarch and his assembly were transformed to rock precisely where they remained. Dictys, the fisherman who had demonstrated compassion to a mother and her offspring, transformed into the fresh monarch. The mercilessness's pattern was fractured, at minimum for a duration. Yet a prediction once uttered proves not effortless escaping. Perseus traveled to Argos, where King Acrisius, continuing frightened by the oracle's declarations, fled rather than confronting the youth he had previously dispatched to perish. Yet destiny possesses an extended remembrance. At the memorial competitions for a nearby monarch, Perseus hurled a disc and unintentionally struck an aged male within the assembly. It represented Acrisius, his grandfather, who perished absent ever recognizing that his mortality wasn't a slaughter, but a mishap that had been predicted ages past. Consequently, the narrative arrived in complete rotation, as it perpetually accomplishes in legends. Perseus had accomplished the prediction, yet not intentionally. He had eliminated a beast, rescued a princess, initiated a monarch's lineage, and managed his destiny with respectability. He wouldn't exist perpetually, yet his identity would. From his lineage would arrive Heracles. Plus from Heracles, the subsequent segment in the narrative of immortals and mortals would commence. Provided Perseus represented the initial magnificent champion, Heracles represented the most powerful. His identity received recognition universally. He wasn't merely powerful, but a grander-than-existence figure who existed upon the boundary of representing a male and an immortal, encountering both magnificent happiness and profound misery, remarkable triumphs, and horrific catastrophes. He represented Perseus's great-grandchild, an Argus descendant, and Zeus's offspring. While the immortals bestowed him might, they additionally bestowed him an existence of torment. His emergence represented a deception's consequence. Zeus, who perpetually experienced romantic feelings, desired Alcmene, the Theban general Amphitrion's spouse. He camouflaged himself as her spouse and experienced an evening with her that stretched as extended as 3 evenings. From this, Heracles emerged. From Amphitryon, a mortal twin named Iphicles additionally emerged. Hera, as perpetually, observed from her seat with fury. She recognized her spouse's methods, and recognized that this half-immortal offspring might someday represent a menace to her. Even as an infant, Heracles demonstrated indications of his divine character. Hera, attempting eliminating him initially, dispatched 2 serpents into his nursery for strangling him. Yet the infant grasped them, one within each appendage, and suffocated them to mortality prior to anybody could even shriek. From that occasion forward, he commenced transforming celebrated. As a youthful youth, he received training in all the abilities a nobleman should possess: melody, projectile shooting, grappling, and vehicle operation. Yet an untamed aspect to him existed that no instructor could dominate. As a male, he discovered both affection and catastrophe. He married Megara, the Theban monarch Creon's daughter, and existed peacefully for a duration, possessing males and safeguarding his municipality. Yet Hera hadn't disregarded him. Within a burst of divine fury, she generated Heracles becoming insane. He raged throughout his personal residence and eliminated his spouse and offspring through the identical appendages that had previously grasped them. Upon the insanity departing him and he perceived what he had accomplished, his wails received hearing on Olympus, yet no immortal assisted him. To compensate for his horrific actions, he traveled to Delphi's oracle. The Pythia, communicating in enigmas, informed him he had to serve Eurystheus, Turin's monarch, his relative, who proved feebler yet possessed a superior destiny. Exclusively by serving him and enduring could Heracles discover absolution. This represented the commencement of the 12 tasks, assignments so magnificent and challenging that even the immortals experienced impressment. The initial task represented eliminating the Nemean lion, a beast whose golden pelt couldn't be severed by any tool. Heracles imprisoned it within its cavern and suffocated it through his unadorned appendages. He afterward employed the lion's personal talon for skinning it and adorned the covering as protective covering. The subsequent task represented eliminating the Lernaean Hydra, a serpent possessing 9 craniums. For every cranium that received severance, 2 additional ones would regenerate. Heracles battled it within the marshlands through the assistance of his nephew Iolaus, who combusted the neck's remains as they received severance. From the final cranium, which was immortal and toxic, Heracles extracted its poison and submerged his projectiles within it, generating them lethal even to immortals. The third task represented capturing the Cyrenian hind, a deer possessing golden appendages that was consecrated to Artemis. Heracles pursued it throughout a year across elevations and waterways prior to capturing it breathing, which acquired him the goddess's hesitant admiration. The fourth task transported him to the Erymanthian boar, an enormous untamed beast. He grappled it within the frozen Arcadia peaks and transported it backward to Turin's in restraints, ridiculing as Eurystheus concealed within a bronze container in terror. The fifth assignment proved less thrilling, purifying the Augean enclosures, which accommodated thousands of livestock and hadn't received purification throughout decades. Heracles, perpetually a difficulty resolver, redirected 2 waterways for washing away the contamination within a solitary occasion. The sixth represented expelling the Stymphalian avians, mortal-consuming beings possessing bronze beaks and penetrating feathered appendages. Through the assistance of Athena's noisemaker, he frightened them into the atmosphere and projectile terminated them downward. The seventh task transported him distant westward for capturing the Cretan bull, a divine beast that represented the Minotaur's father. Heracles grappled it and transported it backward breathing, whereas the bull's vision combusted with insanity. The eighth task dispatched him northward to Thrace, where he had to domesticate Diomedes' mares, flesh-consuming equines. He nourished their commander, Diomedes, to them, and the beasts transformed tranquil. The ninth task involved both negotiation and combat. Heracles received dispatch for obtaining Hippolyta's girdle, the Amazon's monarch. Despite the monarch consenting bestowing it to him peacefully, Hera dispersed gossip among the fighter females, and a conflict erupted. Heracles eliminated Hippolyta and departed with the belt. The 10th task transported him to the recognized planet's boundary, to Erythea, where he pilfered Geryon's livestock, a titan possessing 3 physiques. He constructed Heracles' pillars at Gibraltar's Strait and battled the titan, his herders, and his canine all simultaneously prior to transporting the crimson livestock backward across territories. Yet Eurystheus, attempting discrediting him, declared that 2 among the tasks didn't calculate since Iolaus had assisted with the Hydra and the waterways had assisted with the enclosures. Consequently, 2 additional tasks received requirements. The 11th represented pilfering the Hesperides' golden fruits, which received protection from nature spirits and a dragon coiled surrounding the vegetation. Heracles deceived Atlas, who elevated the firmament, into obtaining the fruits for him whereas he elevated the heavens. Upon Atlas attempting abandoning him bearing the load, Heracles requested an instant for adjusting his garment, reclaimed the firmament, and fled with the produce. The 12th and ultimate task proved most hazardous, descending into Hades itself and transporting backward Cerberus, the 3-cranium canine. Possessing nothing except his might, Heracles traveled to the netherworld, encountered Hades, and through the immortal's severe authorization, grappled Cerberus into surrender. He afterward transported the snarling beast to the breathing's territory. Through that ultimate task, he had acquired his absolution. Yet Heracles' existence continued not peacefully. He battled additional conflicts, married fresh spouses, and possessed numerous offspring. Yet Hera's animosity never concluded. Ultimately, it wasn't a weapon or a beast that eliminated him, but the centaur Nessus's toxic gore, which was smeared on a garment bestowed to him by his spouse Deianira, who believed it represented an affection charm. As the toxin combusted his epidermis, Heracles constructed his personal memorial blaze on Mount Oda. Nobody attempted igniting it until Philoctetes, a simple herder, came forward. For this, he received the champion's projectile launcher. Heracles was consumed by combustion, yet in mortality he experienced rebirth. Zeus transported him to Olympus, where he received immortality and married to Hebe, youthfulness's goddess. He transformed not merely a champion, but an immortal. His tasks, which emerged from misery and remorse, transformed into heroism's benchmark. Whereas additional ones received remembrance in narratives, Heracles received remembrance in holy places, in competitions, and within mortal spirits who, despite being mortal, attempted dreaming of becoming magnificent. Provided Heracles represented the Greek champions most magnificent, afterward Theseus represented the most governmental, the most intelligent, and the most mortal. He wasn't merely a beast's eliminator or malediction's fracture. He represented a municipality's constructor, regulations fashioner, and Athens's founding father, the municipality that would someday receive labeling as civilization's birthplace. His narrative represents a combination of legend and chronicle, possessing champions' authority and politics' silent influence. He possessed both magnificent might and a brilliant intellect, symbolizing a nation's two aspects that venerated Athena through both a weapon and an olive branch. Theseus possessed two fathers, Athens' king Aegeus and Poseidon, the aquatic immortal. His mother, Aethra, was with both among them throughout the identical evening, one mortal and one divine. From this dual joining, a destiny's youth emerged. He received nurturing distance from Athens within Trojan's municipality, not recognizing his royal and divine gore. Prior to his departure, Aegeus had concealed a weapon and footwear beneath a vast rock. He informed Aethra that upon their male offspring being powerful sufficiently for elevating the rock, he would prove prepared, claiming his royal entitlements. Throughout duration, Theseus expanded, elevated and penetrating, brimming with vitality in both his physique and his intellect. At 16, he elevated the rock and extracted his father's items. Numerous people would have selected the effortless route to Athens through waters, yet Theseus selected traversing through territory, the extended and more hazardous route. He believed that genuine monarchy had to receive acquisition, not merely inheritance. Consequently commenced Theseus's 6 tasks. They weren't as magnificent as Heracles' trials, yet they proved more individual, each involving a roots beast that terrorized ordinary populations. He vanquished Periphetes, the club possessor, and extracted his tool as a symbol. He eliminated Cines, who restrained travelers to flexed pine vegetation and tore them apart. He forced Sciron from a precipice into the waters, concluding a male's governance who generated people washing his feet and afterward kicked them to their mortalities. He defeated Circean the grappler by employing method rather than merely might. Plus, he eliminated Procrustes, who generated beds fitting travelers by extending or severing them within the identical manner. Theseus didn't merely survive. He generated the territory securely as he traversed, preparing the route for Athens' ascending. When he reached Athens, King Aegeus didn't recognize him. The king's wife, Medea, who was now wed to Aegeus and still used her dark magic, saw the young man as a threat and convinced the king to poison him. But Theseus showed them the sword and sandals, and at the last moment, Aegeus knocked the cup away and hugged his son in front of everyone. Of course, happiness never lasted long in myths. Trouble was coming from the east. For years, Athens had been forced to pay a terrible price. In a war with the island of Crete, Athens had lost. As punishment, King Minos required that 7 young men and 7 young women be sent every 9 years to feed the Minotaur. The Minotaur was a horrible half-man, half-bull, born from lust and revenge, and kept in a winding maze beneath the palace at Knossos. This creature was born because of Minos's pride. When Poseidon sent a bull from the sea, Minos was supposed to sacrifice it, but he kept it for himself instead. As punishment, the gods cursed his wife, Pasiphae, to fall in love with the bull. From their strange union came the Minotaur, Asterion, who had horns and was violent. He was a living shame, locked in the maze built by Daedalus, the great inventor. Theseus, hearing about this tribute, volunteered to be one of those chosen. He would go not as a victim, but as a hunter. Before leaving, he promised his father that if he won, he would come back with white sails on his ship. If he failed, the sails would stay black. When he arrived in Crete, his fate changed once more. Ariadne, Minos's daughter and the Minotaur's half-sister, saw Theseus and fell in love with him. She gave him a ball of thread and the secret to finding his way through the maze. That night, Theseus entered the labyrinth. In its dark, twisting hallways, he found the beast. They fought a prince against a monster. Theseus, using his skill and a sharp blade, killed the creature. Then he followed the thread back to the light. He left with Ariadne and the freed Athenians, sailing into the Aegean Sea. Yet affection in Greek narratives proves never straightforward. On Naxos's island, Theseus abandoned Ariadne backward. Certain people claim it occurred since Dionysus desired her for himself. Additional ones claim Theseus experienced terror of what an Athenian seat possessing a Cretan bride would signify. She awakened isolated and wept beneath unfamiliar celestial bodies. Theseus persisted his voyage homeward, yet in his misery or disregarding, he disregarded altering the fabric. From Athens's precipices, King Aegeus perceived the black fabric on the boundary and believed his male offspring had perished. Overwhelmed by grief, he leaped into the waters, which presently receives identification as the Aegean waters in his tribute. Presently monarch, Theseus didn't require a respite. He unified Attica, the territory surrounding Athens, joining its settlements into one municipality state. He initiated celebrations, competitions, sanctuaries, and regulations. He represented a governance champion as considerably as he represented a combat champion. He possessed additional exploits, battling alongside Heracles against the Amazons and traveling to the netherworld with his imprudent companion Pirithous for attempting to pilfer Persephone herself from Hades. That voyage concluded poorly. Pirithous was consumed by the ground, and Theseus was imprisoned in the disregarding's chair, his remembrance disappearing away. Exclusively Heracles, on his personal voyage, was capable of liberating him. Yet temporality, as perpetually, transforms things. Ultimately, the Athenians, exhausted of monarchs and influenced by fresh champions and fresh concepts, dispatched Theseus into banishment. He traveled to Syros's island, where he experienced betrayal through a possessive monarch and was flung from a precipice. His skeletal remains were subsequently transported backward to Athens and interred with respect. Yet upon perishing, he remained isolated, possessing no assembly, no crown, and no melodies. Still, his heritage persisted. Whereas Heracles symbolized the physique's might, Theseus symbolized the polis's might, the municipality, the regulation, and the populations unified by more than merely lineage. Athens would expand on his foundations. Although it would venerate Athena, it would perpetually recall the monarch who constructed its framework. Extensively preceding Troy's devastation and extensively following the Titans' vanquishment, existed a voyage dissimilar to any alternative. It represented a pursuit that traversed territories and involved immortals, unified champions in a brotherhood, and concluded in treachery and banishment. It represented a narrative of serpents and commitments, of monarchs who forfeited their seats and those who reclaimed them. Plus, at its spirit remained Jason, a prince who experienced banishment as an offspring. He represented a champion who was propelled not through conflict or prophecy, but through an extended and gradual longing for payback. His narrative commenced in Iolcus, a realm beside the waters in Thessaly. Jason's father, Aeson, experienced his seat extracted by his personal brother, Peleus, a male who exclusively cared regarding authority. Peleus, terrified that the youth might someday ascend against him, attempted eliminating Jason upon his emergence. Yet Aeson, who received caution, dispatched the infant away. He was secretly extracted from the assembly and nurtured by the intelligent centaur Chiron, who had additionally trained Achilles, Asclepius, and additional celebrated champions. Jason expanded powerful within the untamed, learning regarding nature and understanding. He transformed powerful from pursuing, and his intellect received sharpening through melodies regarding monarchs who had descended and ascended again. Years subsequently, Jason returned as a male adorning exclusively one footwear. As he was traversing the Anoros waterway, he had forfeited one within the mud while assisting an aged female across. The female, naturally, represented the goddess Hera disguised, who was examining the youthful champion. Upon penetrating the municipality, Peleus perceived the stranger possessing one footwear and expanded pale. An oracle had previously cautioned him, "Beware the male who arrives possessing one footwear." Jason, who proved courageous yet not nonsensical, didn't initiate a conflict. He communicated distinctly. He represented Aeson's male offspring and the legitimate successor. Peleus, who proved excessively intelligent attacking him openly, simulated welcoming him and presented him with a challenge. "Provided you desire to represent the monarch," he declared, "afterward demonstrate your deserving. Travel to the distant territory of Cronus and transport me backward to the Golden Fleece. Provided you transport backward that primordial reward, I shall bestow you the crown." The special fur came from an enchanted sheep with shining golden hair that had previously transported a young royal boy called Phrixus to a safe place. The sheep had flown him over the ocean, and after Phrixus got safely to Cronus, he killed the creature to thank the gods. The fur, shining like flames, got attached to an oak tree in a special forest, protected by serpents and darkness, and guarded by King Aeetes, who was the child of Helios, the sun god. No person from Greece had ever traveled there and returned home. However, Jason said yes to the test. He asked the best heroes of his era to come with him. They arrived not like warriors, but as people who chose to come, all wanting fame. Heracles arrived, along with Orpheus carrying his musical instrument. Atalanta the female hunter, Castor and Pollux, Zeus's boys, Meleager, Theseus and Zeus and Calais, the flying children of the north wind god, 50 heroes altogether. As a group, they climbed onto a boat named the Argo, which was constructed by Argus with Athena's assistance. At the boat's front, she put a chunk of holy oak wood from Dodona, a piece of timber that could talk and predict what would happen next. The boat itself became an important part of the tale, speaking quiet warnings and directing their path. They traveled eastward, beyond coastlines and across bad weather toward legendary places. Their initial difficulties weren't against creatures, but against other people. At Lemnos Island, they discovered a place controlled by women who had murdered all their husbands. There, Jason became father to boys with Hypsipyle, the island's ruler, children he would never watch become adults. In Thrace, they found the sightless fortune-teller Phineus, who got bothered by the Harpies, winged beings who would grab and ruin his meals. The winged Boreads drove the creatures far away, and as payment, Phineus shared a future-telling with them, a method to pass through the dangerous clashing rocks, two giant stones that would crash together on anybody attempting to go through. Using Phineus's guidance, they let go of a bird. It flew across and only lost one small tail feather. The Argo raced after it at maximum speed, and the rocks only barely grabbed its back end. Following that, the pathway became secure. It appeared that the ocean honored those who showed bravery. Finally, they arrived at Cronus, a place of flames and metal. King Aeetes didn't murder them immediately. Jason was a visitor, and during those old days, visitors got treated with kindness. However, Aeetes said he would hand over the fur only if Jason finished 3 jobs: control bulls that breathe fire, use them to plow a field, plant it with dragon teeth, and then beat the soldiers who would sprout from the dirt. These weren't challenges of bravery, they were tasks nobody could do. It would have finished there if the gods hadn't gotten involved. Eros, because Hera asked him to, shot Medea, Aeetes' daughter, with a love arrow. She served as a holy woman for Hecate, talented with plants and harmful liquids, and had never been with any man. However, after she looked at Jason, her feelings got captured. She provided him with a liquid to keep him safe from the flames, showed him how to toss a rock among the dirt-born fighters so they would battle each other, and lastly brought him to the fur itself, which got guarded by a snake that never rested. Medea performed magical songs, and the animal fell into sleep. Jason grabbed the fur, which glowed and felt soft like liquid gold, and ran away with Medea during the dark hours. Aeetes followed them with his boats, but the couple had given themselves time through a horrible deed. Medea had grabbed her younger brother, Abscetus, chopped him into chunks, and tossed them into the ocean. This made her father have to stop and gather the body pieces for a proper burial. The Argo escaped, but now it carried the stain of murder and sorcery. Their trip home became long and full of danger, going past Scylla and Charybdis, across dangerous territories. At last, they came back to Iolcus. However, Peleus wouldn't hand over the throne. Medea, wanting punishment for Peleus, fooled his daughters into chopping him into pieces and cooking him, lying to them that it was magic to make him young once more. Shocked and upset, the citizens of Iolcus fought back. Jason, now viewed as someone who betrayed others, got forced to leave. He traveled to Corinth, where he and Medea stayed for many years in an uncomfortable calm. However, Jason, always searching for a better situation, abandoned Medea and decided to wed a princess from Corinth. Medea, feeling cheated and wanting revenge, released a horrible rage. She put poison on the bride's dress, burning her into ash, and then she killed her own boys with Jason. Following that, she ran away in a wagon pulled by flying lizards, a present from her grandfather, Helios. Jason, totally destroyed, came back to Iolcus. During his last days, he wandered through broken buildings, nobody remembering him. One day, while taking a rest under the Argo, which was now very old and breaking apart, a chunk of the boat fell off and struck him on the head. And so the famous hero passed away, not during a fight, not in fame, but in quiet, under the leftovers of his past. Still, the tale of Jason continued to be told. Because in the search for the fur, in the bringing together of heroes, in love that went wrong, and in greatness that got ruined, Greece discovered one of its most remembered myths, the tale of the promise and the payment required for wanting too much. Very few families in Greek myths have more bad luck than the royal family of Thebes. While most heroes battled creatures or traveled by boat to faraway places to get thrones, the kings of Thebes battled their own family members and fought against their own history. Their tale isn't one of winning and having parties, but one of puzzles, going crazy and killing. Even starting, the city was filled with warnings and problems. Thebes started with a search. Cadmus, a prince from Phoenicia and Europa's brother, went looking for his sister after Zeus, pretending to be a white bull, took her away. When he couldn't locate her, Cadmus visited the oracle at Delphi for assistance. The oracle said to stop searching for his sister and to follow a cow instead until it laid down. At that spot, he should build a city. He did what he was told and followed the cow until it stopped on a hill. However, when Cadmus sent his friends to fetch water, they got killed by a snake that was sacred to Ares, the war god, which was protecting a spring. Cadmus killed the snake by himself, and following Athena's suggestion, he stuck its teeth in the dirt. From the ground grew armed soldiers, the Spartae or planted men, who battled each other until only 5 remained. These 5 became the important families of Thebes, and Cadmus became their ruler. However, killing Ares' snake brought the gods rage. Cadmus had to work for the war god for 8 years as his punishment. He married Harmonia, the daughter of Ares and Aphrodite, and the gods themselves showed up at their wedding. The couple received a cursed necklace made by Hephaestus, a pretty thing that would cause disaster to everyone who put it on. And so the bad fate of Thebes started not with hatred, but with a celebration cursed by beauty and blood. Many generations passed. Cadmus's daughters all lived sad lives. Ino lost her mind and threw her child into the ocean. Autonoa's son, Actaeon, got ripped apart by his own hunting dogs after he saw Artemis taking a bath. Semele, who Zeus loved, got tricked by Hera into asking him to reveal his true appearance and got burned to death. And Agave, during a moment of wild Dionysian craziness, tore her own son, Pentheus, into pieces, believing he was a lion. However, it was through Cadmus's great-great-grandson Laius that the true tragedy would take place. Laius became the ruler of Thebes and married Jocasta. However, the gods had not forgiven Cadmus's family. An oracle appeared and said that if Laius ever had a son, that boy would kill his father and marry his mother. Like in all Greek tales, the warning wasn't enough to prevent the terrible thing from happening. Laius had a son with Jocasta. Frightened, Laius ordered the baby's ankles to be stabbed and tied, and then gave him to a servant to be abandoned on Mount Cithaeron. However, the servant felt bad for the baby and gave him to a shepherd, who then gave him to the king and queen of Corinth, Polybus and Merope, who had no children and raised the boy like their own. They named him Oedipus, which means swollen foot, and never said he was adopted. Oedipus grew up to be a smart and proud young man, but he heard rumors about his birth. To find the truth, he went to Delphi, where the oracle gave him the same prophecy that was once given to Laius, that he would kill his father and marry his mother. Horrified, and believing that Polybus and Merope were his real parents, Oedipus ran away from Corinth, unknowingly heading straight toward his fate. On the road, near a crossroads, he met a stranger who was old, proud, and bossy. They argued over who had the right to pass, and in his anger, Oedipus killed the man and his servants, not knowing that he had just killed his real father, Laius. He continued on to Thebes, which was being terrorized not by an army but by the Sphinx, a creature with the body of a lion, the wings of an eagle, and the face of a woman. She ate anyone who couldn't answer her riddle. "What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening?" Oedipus answered without hesitation. "Man!" The Sphinx, defeated, threw herself off a cliff. Thebes celebrated. The city's savior was made king, and as a reward, he was given the widowed queen as his wife, Jocasta, his own mother. Years went by. Oedipus ruled well and had 4 children, Eteocles, Polynices, Antigone, and Ismene. But a plague came to Thebes, and the oracle said that the land was cursed because of an unpunished murder. Slowly and terribly the truth came out. The old man at the crossroads, the queen's sadness, the scarred feet, the servant who survived, and the blind prophet Tiresias, who revealed that the king was both father and brother to his children, and son and husband to his wife. Jocasta hanged herself. Oedipus took her brooches and blinded himself. He asked to be exiled and wandered the land as a miserable figure, guided only by Antigone. In the hills near Cronus, he found a peaceful place and finally a quiet death, swallowed by the earth. His grave was a secret kept by the gods. However, his children couldn't escape the curse. Eteocles and Polynices battled for the throne. When Polynices got sent away, he gathered an army from Argos and led the 7 against Thebes, a war that caused lots of bleeding in the city. The brothers killed each other in a fight at the city entrance gates. Thebes lived, but its soul was broken. Antigone, the last person to hold onto the old feeling of honor, buried her brother even though it was against the king's rules. For this, she got sentenced by her uncle Creon and buried alive. The gods punished his family with craziness and death. Thebes kept existing, but its rulership was a repeating cycle of disaster. The tale of Oedipus isn't about killing monsters or building cities. It's a tale of destiny, of how a man can do everything to avoid a prediction and still wind up making it come true. It's a sad story not about being evil, but about not knowing the truth, about a man who looked for the truth and got destroyed by it. The family of Thebes, with all its greatness, was built on the bones of snakes and riddles, and no riddle, no matter how cleverly answered, can change what the gods have decided. Out of all the wars that ever took place on human land, none would get remembered more than the one fought because of a woman's beauty. It was a war of promises and pride, of beauty and backstabbing, of gods and rulers, and the falling of kingdoms. It didn't begin with weapons or flames, but with a wedding that all the gods got invited to, except for one. Eris, the goddess of fighting, didn't get invited to the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, the sea nymph who was destined to have a son bigger than his father. In her anger, Eris threw a golden apple into the party with 3 words carved on it that would wreck kingdoms: "To the prettiest." The apple got claimed by Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, each one thinking she was the most worthy. To decide who should get it, they went to a human shepherd prince named Paris, the son of King Priam of Troy. He had been sent to live in the hills after a prediction said he would one day burn down his city. The goddesses brought him to Mount Ida to judge, and one by one they offered him bribes. Hera promised him control over all men. Athena promised him wisdom and winning in war. However, Aphrodite, with a gentle smile, offered him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris picked love, and so Helen of Sparta, the daughter of Zeus and later the wife of Menelaus, got chosen for him. She had many admirers when she was young, princes and kings from all over Achaea who were drawn not just by her beauty, but by the chance to be connected to the gods. Her human father, King Tyndareus, was scared that a war would start over who would marry her. Following Odysseus's advice, he made all the admirers take a sacred promise. Whoever married Helen, all the others would promise to protect their marriage and punish anyone who tried to break it. The agreement was made with laughter, but promises, once made, tie more than just men. They tie destiny. Menelaus, the brother of King Agamemnon of Mycenae, won her hand. They ruled Sparta well and their kingdom was powerful. However, when Paris came to visit, pretending to be a peaceful guest, he saw Helen and knew she was the prize Aphrodite had promised him. Whether she went with him because she wanted to or got taken isn't clear. The storytellers tell different versions. However, when Paris sailed back across the Aegean Sea, Helen was with him, and at that moment the war started. Menelaus was extremely angry. He called on all who had sworn the promise, and they all came. Odysseus of Ithaca, who was clever and didn't want to go. Nestor, the old wise man of Pylos. Ajax the Great, son of Telamon, who was tall and serious. Ajax the Lesser, who was fast and fierce. Diomedes of Argos, who was brave and loved to battle. Idomeneus of Crete, who was strong and steady. From all over Hellas they came, kings, princes, and fighters. Only 2 of them tried to stay away. Odysseus pretended to be crazy, plowing his fields with salt until a clever messenger put his baby son in front of the plow. And Achilles, the son of Thetis, got hidden by his mother among the daughters of Lycomedes, dressed as a girl to escape a destiny she had predicted. However, the Greeks found him. Odysseus, once again, tricked Achilles by showing him a spear and shield among gifts of jewelry, and the boy picked war. They gathered at Aulis, a fleet of 1,000 ships, with their bronze armor shining and sails like storm clouds. However, the winds wouldn't blow. The ships were stuck, and the men got restless. The fortune-teller Calchas showed that Artemis was angry, maybe because of a boast or a killed deer, and that only a big sacrifice would calm her. The name, he said, was Iphigenia, the daughter of Agamemnon. There are stories of lies told to bring her to Aulis, pretending it was for a marriage to Achilles, of her weeping mother, Clytemnestra, of the moment the blade fell, or of a last-second rescue with Artemis taking the girl away and putting a deer in her spot. However, in most versions, the blood was real, and the gods watched as the king killed his own child for the sake of war. The winds came. The fleet sailed east, and the world was never the same. The Greeks landed on the shores of Troy, not as raiders but as a force of justice. For 10 years they would camp under the walls of Ilium, the great city ruled by Priam and defended by his sons, Hector, noble and doomed, Paris, handsome and weak, Deiphobus, Helenus, and the others. The gods took sides. Hera, Athena, and Poseidon supported the Greeks. Aphrodite, Ares, Apollo, and Artemis were on the side of the Trojans. Only Zeus tried to stay neutral, but even he would be influenced by fate and family. This was not yet the war described in Homer's Iliad, which would start in the 10th year. But the war itself had already begun, not just with weapons and walls, but with broken promises, betrayed trust, the sacrifice of daughters, and the judgment of gods. It was a war born not only from love, but from pride, divine rivalry, mortal vanity, old curses, and deep fears. And it would end not with victory, but with fire. By the time Homer's Iliad begins, the war at Troy has been happening for 9 long years. The Greeks, the determined kings who had once crossed the Aegean with great power, had fallen into a grim routine of siege and survival. What had started with anger and fire had become something colder, slower, and more desperate. They built camps with black walls along the shore, pulled their ships onto the sand, and sent out raiding parties every day, not just to fight, but also to get food for their armies. The war kept going like a wound that wouldn't heal, and both sides felt the pain getting worse. The Trojans, who were safe behind their strong walls, which were said to have been built by Poseidon and a human builder Apollo had once worked for, were suffering but holding on. The fields outside the city had been destroyed long ago. Their helpers came from the east and north. Sarpedon of Lycia, Memnon of Ethiopia, and others brought new strength to their cause. However, the Greeks would not leave without Helen. Pride, as much as their promises, kept them there. The war had become about their legacy. However, a war isn't just about walls and ships. It's about the feelings of the people involved. And in this war, 2 men were more passionate than anyone else. Agamemnon, the king of kings, who was stern and powerful, and Achilles, the son of Thetis and Peleus, who was the best warrior, destined to die young and determined to make his death meaningful. The argument between these 2 would break the fragile Greek partnership. It started, as many arguments do, over a woman. In one of their many raids, the Greeks had taken prisoners. Among them were Chryseis, the daughter of a priest of Apollo, and Briseis, a princess of Lionessus. Chryseis got given to Agamemnon and Briseis to Achilles. When Chryseis' father came to get her back, bringing gold and respectful words, Agamemnon insulted him. The old man prayed to Apollo, and the god responded not with fire from the sky, but with a sickness, a silent killer that spread from animals to men, filling the air with death. The fortune-teller Calchas finally showed the truth. Agamemnon got forced to give up Chryses to save his army, but in return, he demanded Briseis from Achilles as payment. This was an insult that Achilles couldn't accept. He left the council in a rage, called Agamemnon a greedy coward, and swore a promise to the gods that he would no longer fight for the Greeks. He told them to let themselves get defeated without him, and so he went back to his tent. And with him went the Myrmidons, his elite warriors who were silent and deadly. From that moment forward, the war changed. Without Achilles, the Greeks started losing. The Trojans fought harder. Hector, the son of Priam and the champion of Troy, led the attack with a quiet and noble fury. He wasn't like Paris, who had started the war, or Deiphobus, who was searching for glory. Hector was the heart of the city. He was a husband, a father, and a prince who carried the weight of his people not with pride, but with a sense of responsibility. Day after day, the Trojans pushed the Greeks back toward the sea. Ships got set on fire. Heroes got killed. Protelaus, the first Greek to jump ashore, had died in the first battle. Now Patroclus, a friend and companion of Achilles, watched the losses grow with increasing sadness. Some say Patroclus was a friend, others a lover, but everyone agrees that he was the only one who could reach Achilles in his grief and anger. When the Trojans broke through the Greek defenses and were about to burn the ships, Patroclus begged Achilles to let him fight in his place. He wore the hero's armor, rode his chariot, and led the Myrmidons into battle. For a while, the Greeks were able to fight back. However, Patroclus, caught up in the glory, went too far. He reached the gates of Troy, and there he met Hector. Their fight was brutal, and it ended with Patroclus getting killed by Hector's spear. And with his death, any peace that was left in Achilles' heart disappeared. When Achilles discovered his death, his sadness was so huge it shook the camp. He didn't weep like a man, he screamed like a storm god, full of rage and destruction. He returned to the battle not for glory or for promises, but for revenge. His mother, Thetis, brought him new armor made by Hephaestus himself. The bronze shone like the sun, and the shield got carved with the history of the world. Then Achilles went to war. Nobody could stop him. He killed men by the dozens, knocked over chariots, and stained the dust with blood. He chased Hector around the walls of Troy 3 times before they fought one-on-one. Hector fought bravely, but Achilles was like a fire that couldn't be put out. He struck Hector down, stabbed him through, and in his rage, he dragged his body behind his chariot, going around the city day after day, refusing to give the dead prince a proper burial. It was Priam, the old king of Troy, who stopped this craziness. At night, guided by Hermes, he sneaked into the Greek camp and knelt before Achilles. He kissed the hands that had killed his son. He spoke not as a king, but as a father, and Achilles finally wept. He returned Hector's body and allowed Priam to leave safely. For a moment, there was quiet in the war. However, peace, as always, didn't last long. Achilles would not survive the war. A poisoned arrow, some say shot by Paris, others guided by Apollo, hit his heel, the only part of him that could get hurt. He died in the dust, young and unbeaten, and the war kept going without him. The Iliad ends not with the fall of Troy, but with a funeral and a shared sadness. However, the war wasn't finished. The gods weren't done, and neither were the Greeks. The wooden horse had not yet been built. The gates had not yet been opened. However, the blood had been spilled, and the tide would soon change. The war had drained the land. 10 years of siege had turned warriors into empty shells, kings into ghosts, and heroes into memories. Troy, which was once a golden city, stood behind its walls like an old lion surrounded by wolves. Priam's sons had fallen one by one. Hector, the city's protector, got killed by Achilles. Troilus got killed when he was still a boy. Polydorus got murdered through backstabbing. The Trojans fought with the desperation of men who were defending not just their city, but their history. And still, they held on year after year, while the Greeks grew tired and restless in their smoky camps. Then, just as the gods appeared to be getting bored, the Greeks vanished. At sunrise, the Trojans looked from their towers and saw no boats on the ocean. The fleet had gone. In its spot on the flat land outside the Scaean gate stood a huge wooden horse as tall as a temple. Its body was made of smooth cedar boards, and its mane got carved to honor Poseidon. There were no soldiers, no weapons clashing. It appeared that the war had ended in silence. Troy didn't celebrate right away. Priam, who was old and careful, didn't trust it. Others also told them to be careful. However, it was Sinon, a clever Greek who got left behind, who sealed the city's fate. Acting like a traitor to his own people, he told a tale so believable that it could have come from Odysseus himself. He said that the horse was an offering to Athena, a peace gift left behind after the Greeks had sailed away. If the Trojans brought it into their city, it would make sure they stayed powerful for many years. However, if they dared to wreck it, they would be destroyed. Only Laocoon, a priest of Poseidon, told the truth. "Be careful of Greeks bringing gifts," he warned, and threw a spear at the horse's side. The wood made a groaning noise. Something shifted inside. However, at that moment, as if the gods themselves were tired of giving warnings, two huge ocean snakes with eyes like burning coals came out of the water and crushed Laocoon and his sons. The people saw this and thought it was a message from the gods. Troy had refused a gift from the gods once before. They would not do it again. With ropes and wheels, with cheers and songs, they brought the horse inside their walls. That night, while the city partied and the fires died down, a hidden door in the horse's belly opened with a loud groan. Out came Odysseus, Menelaus, Neoptolemus, Diomedes, and others who got chosen for their cruelty and smartness. At the same time, the Greek fleet, which had been hiding on the nearby island of Tenedos, came back quietly in the dark. Troy was sleeping. What happened next wasn't a war, it was a slaughter. Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, rushed through the palace like a dark storm. He killed Priam at Zeus's altar, and the old king's blood soaked the stones. Cassandra, Priam's daughter and accursed fortune-teller, got dragged screaming from Athena's temple, her warnings once again ignored. Hecuba, Troy's queen, watched her sons die and her city burn. The Greeks showed no mercy. Astyanax, Hector's baby son, got thrown from the walls so that he couldn't grow up to be dangerous. Temples got wrecked, women got taken, and the city of Troy, once Asia's pride, got burned to the ground. Helen, the woman whose beauty had begun the war, got found in the palace. Some say she wept and begged for forgiveness. Others say she stood proud and didn't care about the sadness. Menelaus, with his sword in his hand, looked into her eyes and dropped it. He took her back to Sparta, and the war finally had its last win. When the sun came up over the flat land, there was nothing left but smoke and ash. The walls had fallen. The gods looked away, but the war didn't end cleanly. The winners had their own curses. Ajax the Lesser, who had attacked Cassandra in Athena's temple, got drowned at sea. Agamemnon, who came home with Cassandra as his prize, got murdered in his bath by his wife Clytemnestra. The cursed family of Atreus kept suffering. Menelaus and Helen came back to Sparta, but their names were never respected again. Diomedes, Nestor, and others wandered into exile or got forgotten. Odysseus, cursed by Poseidon, wouldn't see his home for 10 long years. His tale, a long trip of shipwrecks and monsters, would become a legend of its own, shaped by gods and loss. Just one person got away from Troy, Aeneas, whose dad was Anchises and whose mom was Aphrodite. He ran away carrying his father on his shoulders and holding his son's hand. Following clues from the sky and heavenly bodies, he brought Troy's final chance toward the west to Italy. The Romans later said that from his family came Romulus and Remus, who built a kingdom bigger than Troy ever was. Troy falling down wasn't simply about one city ending. It meant a whole time period was over, the age of heroes, when people shared meals with gods, when being famous mattered more than living quietly, and when what would happen to you got carved into your body and into rocks. The giant wooden horse, the burning flames, the lying and cheating, the crying women. All these things were the last parts of a story that started with one apple and finished with broken buildings. The walls that had stayed standing through 10 years of fighting came crashing down in just one night, and Troy's dust blew away over the ocean, riding on wind that didn't even notice who had beaten who. Troy getting destroyed wasn't where the story stopped, but where a new type of sadness started. This sad story didn't happen on battlefields out in the open or inside city walls, but on black oceans, in places with terrible storms, and inside the broken-down homes of kings who used to be proud. For the people who made it through the fighting, getting back home turned out to be way more risky than the fighting had been. The gods felt upset about Troy getting wrecked, so they aimed their anger at the people who won. The winds that had earlier pushed them toward the war now blew them apart like falling leaves all over the earth. The big leader, Agamemnon, got back home before everyone else, or at least that's what people thought. He traveled by boat with Cassandra, a girl from Troy who could see the future and who he had grabbed, and he carried back with him gold and jewels, stories to tell, and the darkness of something bad he'd done. The gods hadn't stopped thinking about Iphigenia, his girl, who got killed to make Artemis happy before the fighting started. Back in Mycenae, his wife Clytemnestra, who was a queen, a mom, and basically already acting like her husband was dead, hadn't stopped thinking about it either. While Agamemnon was off fighting, she'd found a new boyfriend, Aegisthus, a relative who had his own angry reasons to want revenge, and who came from the same cursed Atreus family. Working as a team, they made plans to kill Agamemnon right inside his own home. When the king came walking back, feeling good about winning but very worn out, he stepped into his house like he was stepping into a trap somebody had set. Some people say he got stabbed while taking a bath. Other people say Clytemnestra threw a robe around him and chopped him with an axe. Cassandra got killed as well, yelling out in words nobody could understand, murdered in a place far from her home. Clytemnestra, with blood all over her, not feeling even a little bit sorry, stood right over her dead husband's body and said she'd done the right thing. In that home, getting revenge on each other had turned into something the family just did. After some time passed, revenge happened one more time. Orestes, who was the son of both Agamemnon and Clytemnestra, came back from being kicked out and murdered his own mother and also her boyfriend. Apollo told him he should do it, and then the Furies, old goddesses who made people go crazy if they killed their family members, chased after him in his mind. What happened to him was a tale about killing and getting forgiven, a tale that people would talk about in Athens' courtrooms and in old stories for many, many years. But he wasn't the only one who had a really tough trip getting home. Menelaus and Helen traveled around for ages all over the sea, getting blown down south toward Egypt by powerful winds. Some ways of telling the story say that the Helen who showed up at Troy was really just a ghost, and the actual woman had been sitting in Egypt the entire time, not getting any older, while everyone fought a whole war because of something that looked like her. Other ways of telling it say she chose to go with Paris, and Menelaus said he forgave her because he was sick of fighting and just wanted things to be calm. In the end, they got back to Sparta and were the leaders there together, but they didn't really talk much and things felt uncomfortable. But Helen's name, which people used to think about when they thought about beautiful things, had changed into something people thought was bad luck, and Sparta was never going to be as amazing as it was on the day when she went away. But Odysseus was the one whose trip home became the most well-known, the saddest, and the one people remembered longest. When Troy was over, he didn't sail straight home, but instead got stuck in a 10-year nightmare on the water, trapped between Poseidon being mad at him and fate doing whatever it wanted. He hadn't been a good guy. Odysseus thought up the wooden horse trick and was in charge when they attacked Troy, and when he did that, he smashed up temples and made the gods really angry. Poseidon especially picked him out to punish. Odysseus's boat got tossed around from one island to another island, and each island was weirder than the one before. He poked out the eye of Polyphemus, a one-eyed giant who happened to be Poseidon's kid, and got away by being smart and telling everyone his name was Nobody. He hung out with Circe, a witch who changed his sailors into pigs, and with Calypso, a beautiful sea creature, who made him be her boyfriend for 7 whole years. He went all the way to where the land of dead people starts, had conversations with people who weren't alive anymore, and listened to the sirens singing their song, while he was tied up tight against his ship's pole, and his sailors had wax stuck in their ears so they couldn't hear. He sailed his boat through the narrow space between Scylla and Charybdis, watched all his men die because of storms and because they did dumb things, and at last got washed up all by himself on the Phaeacians' island, where the people there felt sorry for him after hearing his story and gave him a boat and a safe ride home. Finally, he made it back to Ithaca, wearing torn-up clothes and not saying anything, with hair on his face that had grown long and eyes that looked cold. Back there, during all the time he'd been gone, a bunch of men who wanted to marry his wife had taken control of his house, eating all his food and making plans to marry Penelope, who had been waiting for him, making the same piece of cloth during the day and then pulling it apart at night by candlelight. Odysseus, getting help from his son Telemachus, from his pig farmer who stayed loyal to him, and using the bow that only he had the strength to pull back, killed every single one of those men. Blood covered the big room. Things became peaceful again, but just for a little while. The pattern of fighting and getting revenge was always close by, ready to start again. Lots of other people ended up with even bad things happening to them. Ajax the Smaller got killed by Athena because of the awful things he did. Diomedes, who was a fighter who didn't get scared, came home and found out his wife had been sneaking around with someone else, and his city didn't like him anymore. He traveled toward where the sun sets, starting new cities and slowly turning into just a story people told. Philoctetes, who had shot Paris dead using Heracles' special bow, didn't get a nice welcome when he tried coming home and ended up just walking around with no place to go. Neoptolemus, who was Achilles' boy, got killed in Delphi, chopped down right at Apollo's special table, maybe as payback for all the people he'd killed at Troy. The Trojan War had made promises about being famous and great, but all it really did was break everything. The brave fighters who had once been on the same team under Ilium's walls went back to houses that were messed up, wives who were mad at them, gods who were angry, and songs that sounded hollow because they didn't fit what really happened anymore. When everything was over, nobody had actually won. There were just people who hadn't died yet. Way before anybody built Troy's walls, before brave people fought or boats moved across the dark water, there was a stronger power, one that was around before people, around even before fighting existed, the gods being in charge. Their stories often get hidden under the stories about regular people, but it was really the Olympians who decided what would happen in the world. And they hadn't been the bosses the whole time. Before Olympus showed up, there was chaos. And after chaos showed up came Gaia, Uranus, Cronus, and the slow, mean way that the god system got made. The time when the Titans were in charge had stopped with fire and loud thunder. Zeus, who was the last one of Cronus's kids, had battled his dad, led his brothers and sisters out of the sky god's stomach, and tossed the Titans down into the dark hole called Tartarus. Taking their spot came the Olympians, 12 of them, even though who they were and what jobs they had changed as years went by. Their names were Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Hestia, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Aphrodite, Hephaestus, and Hermes. Up on Mount Olympus, they set up a brand new way of running things. It wasn't any nicer than what came before it, but it was cleverer, had more complicated parts, and got way more mixed up in what regular people did with their lives. Zeus was the leader from his shiny gold chair, with his lightning bolt sitting right next to him ready to go, and when he said something, that was the rule for both gods and regular people. But he didn't just boss everyone around using his muscles. He was a king who understood how important it was to have friends helping him, who gave rewards to people who were loyal and hurt people who lied to him. He split up the world between his brothers. The sky went to him, the ocean went to Poseidon, and the place where dead people go went to Hades. The earth and Olympus got shared in a way that didn't feel very steady or comfortable. Growing up around him, the brand new bunch of gods started taking shape. Hera, who was his sister and also his queen, was the goddess who watched over getting married and having babies. But she spent her whole time feeling mad and not trusting people because Zeus never stayed true to just her. He had millions of secret relationships with goddesses, nature spirits, and regular human women, and every single one made babies who ended up changing the whole world. Kids like Heracles, Perseus, Helen, and Minos. Hera, who never stopped paying attention, hurt his girlfriends and their kids with an anger that was icy cold and never went away. Standing next to them was Athena, who didn't get born from a mom, but popped out of Zeus's own brain, already full-sized and wearing armor. She was the goddess of being smart and knowing how to win wars. She liked regular people better if they used their brains more than just their muscles, especially Odysseus, and she helped cities like Athens get bigger by using laws and thinking things through. Different from Ares, who got excited about killing people, Athena's way of fighting had rules and was exact. Her being there proved that the Olympian time was about being smart, just as much as about being strong. Apollo and Artemis, the twin kids born to Leto, brought both brightness and darkness with them. Apollo, who had yellow-colored hair, was the god of telling the future, making music and making sick people better. He was in charge of the fortune teller at Delphi, talking in puzzles through the Pythia lady, and making what would happen to kings and battles by saying just a couple mysterious words. but he could also make terrible sicknesses spread, just like he did to the Greek fighters at Troy. Artemis, his twin sister, walked through the woods and men never touched her. She hunted animals and kept wild things safe. She never asked if it was okay and never said sorry to people who went into her special places. Demeter, the goddess who made crops grow, kept the dirt able to grow food, except for when Hades grabbed her daughter Persephone and took her away. When she felt sad about it, Demeter made all the plants die, and because she was so unhappy, that's how the different seasons got started. Her story was part of every farm, every freezing winter, and every nice spring, a circle of being sad and then coming back. Aphrodite, who some people say came up out of the ocean bubbles where Uranus's chopped-off piece fell, was in charge of love and wanting people. How beautiful she looked made both gods and regular people lose their minds. She gave men both ruined lives and good feelings in their hearts. Up on Olympus, she was married to Hephaestus, the god who couldn't walk right and made metal things, but she really loved Ares, the war god. When you put them together, they showed what happens when passion and fighting get all mixed up and messy. Hermes, Zeus's son who could think fast, traveled back and forth between different worlds while working as someone who carried messages, someone who stole stuff, and someone who showed dead souls where to go. He was the god of edges and borders, and he both protected them and crossed right over them. No door could stop Hermes from getting through. He could go easily from Olympus down to Hades, from a party to a battle, and he always had a grin on his face. This brand new bunch of gods didn't run things in a quiet way. The Olympians weren't makers who stayed far away and didn't get involved. They jumped right into what humans were doing, picking who they liked best and fighting their own sneaky wars by using regular people to do it. Different from the Titans, who were like the basic pieces of nature itself, the Olympians acted like humans, just on a god-sized level. When they loved people, it got complicated. When they got mad at someone, they stayed mad forever, and they thought they were the absolute best. They gave help and made things harder however they felt like doing it. Cities got built to honor them. People killed animals to make them happy. Fortune tellers said what they wanted, and every house had a fire going for Hestia, the goddess of the fireplace, who didn't ask for much and gave calmness back. But under all the amazing things about them, there was one thing that was always true. Even though their power was huge, it wasn't total and complete. Promises could tie them down, regular people could trick them, and time could beat them. Even Zeus, with all his greatness, got worried about the same thing that had wrecked his dad, that someday one of his own kids would stand up and knock him off his throne. He didn't want to have a baby with Thetis because of this. She got married to a regular human guy, Peleus, so that the son she'd have, Achilles, would die while he was still young and wouldn't turn into a danger. In this way, the Olympians weren't any different from regular men. They got scared of losing things, they grabbed onto their thrones tight, and they struggled to keep their power. But while they could, they were in charge. People wrote their names all over marble temples, songs got sung about what they did, and their special signs got carved into shields and money. The time of heroes had finished, but the gods still ran the world where people lived. But still, from places far away and prophecies that people whispered, you could kind of tell that something was going to change. Brand new gods were starting to show up, and the temples weren't going to stay packed with people forever. But right now, at this moment, Olympus was still standing tall. The Olympians had lots of power, but they weren't the only gods around. Even while people were building temples for Zeus and Athena's smarts were helping cities figure things out, there were other, scarier gods out there. These were gods of wine and going crazy, of dying and coming back to life, of stuff that people didn't celebrate out in the open, but talked about quietly in hidden spots. The biggest and most important one of these was Dionysus, the last god who got to join Olympus, and the only one who really connected the god world with the wild world. Dionysus wasn't like the usual gods. How he got born was weird. His dad was Zeus and his mom was Semele, a regular human princess from Thebes. When Semele, who got fooled by Hera's trick, asked Zeus to let her see what he really looked like as a god, his super bright godly glow burned her up and killed her. But from what was left of her, Zeus grabbed the baby who wasn't born yet and stitched him up inside his own leg. A few months after that, Dionysus got born a second time, and that's why people called him the born-twice god. And from the second he got born, his life was totally different from any other Olympian's life. He didn't grow up on Olympus, but in faraway spots, living with nature spirits in Nyssa, in caves over in India, and hanging out with satyrs and maenads. He walked around everywhere, not sitting on a throne like a ruler, but going from place to place with his flute and grapevine, with a crowd of dancers who were going wild following behind him. Every place he showed up, grape fields started growing and people stopped thinking clearly. He wasn't only the god of wine, but the god of change, of that super thin line between being civilized and being totally wild, between feeling happy and going nuts. He gave people happiness, but he also gave them craziness. And when that craziness happened, men and women could totally forget who they even were. When he first showed up in Greece, people didn't always want him there. Cities made jokes about his ceremonies, and kings tried to make it illegal to worship him. One after another, he punished every one of them. In Thebes, which was his mom's city, the young god came back but pretended to be someone else. The people following him made everybody upset with their drums and yelling. Pentheus, the super strict king, tried to make the crazy stuff stop. He locked up Dionysus, laughed at the wild ceremonies, and tried to sneak around and watch the women up in the hills. But the god played a trick on him and got him to walk into the woods wearing women's clothes. And right there, when the god's crazy magic was controlling everyone, his own mom, Agave, was the leader of the maenads when they ripped him into pieces. Only when she walked back to the city carrying her son's head on a stick did the magic spell stop working, and everyone in Thebes learned their lesson. Dionysus was the god of plays and acting, not just wine, the god of fake faces you wear and putting on shows, of real truths that hide inside made-up stuff. His parties were where Greek plays happened, where funny shows and sad shows got performed to make him happy. Using fake faces and songs, the Greek people let out fears and things they wanted that they'd never talk about out loud if you asked them. To worship Dionysus wasn't about getting down on your knees to power, but about giving into it totally and completely. And when Dionysus came, he brought something brand new to the Greek world: secret religious groups. These were religions with secret ceremonies where you had to get initiated, and they taught about being reborn. Different from the fancy official ceremonies of Olympus, these secret religious groups gave people something that felt personal and just for them. In the Eleusinian secret ceremonies, people who followed Demeter and Persephone acted out the story about a daughter who got lost to death and then got found again. The Orphics, who followed the poet-mystic guy named Orpheus, talked about Dionysus like he was a god who got ripped apart and then came back to life, a god whose pain brought knowledge and whose ceremonies made promises about getting free from being born over and over again. These secret groups didn't say the Olympians were bad, but they worked on a quieter, deeper level that most people couldn't see. They gave hope in places where the powerful gods only handed out rules. They whispered about a soul that could keep going and rise above the human body that dies. And because they promised that, the old things that Greek people were totally sure about started to wobble and shake. Even way up on Olympus, things started breaking down and getting messed up. The gods fought with each other in meaner ways. Ares and Athena competed to see which warriors would be loyal to them. Apollo fell in love way too many times and it always ended badly, leaving dead people and changed people behind when he left. Aphrodite, who got jealous super easily and you never knew what she'd do, punished regular people for the exact same wanting and desiring that she created in the first place. The gods started acting like the regular people they were supposed to be in charge of, thinking they were the best, changing their minds a lot, getting hurt feelings and feeling lost. With Dionysus, the Olympian way of doing things found what was totally opposite to it and what would end it. He was a god, but he lived like someone who just wandered from place to place. He gave people joy, but when he left, madness stayed behind. He knocked kings off their thrones and made poor farmers feel powerful. And the biggest, most important thing, he changed what it meant when someone said you were a god. The gods weren't far away and lasted forever. Through secret ceremonies, special actions, wine, songs, and going crazy, regular people could feel a god being inside them, not in temples made of stone, but right in their own bodies. And far away in the distance, on the other side of the seas and past the marble columns, brand new gods were starting to get stronger. Rome was getting bigger. The whole world was changing. And Olympus, even with all its power and all its greatness, could already feel the winds of change blowing on top of the mountain. The Olympians, even though they never died and were so great, didn't just keep their stories stuck up on Mount Olympus. They came down into the world where people lived over and over again, showing up as boyfriends or girlfriends, as people trying to get you to do something, as fighters, or as people who punished you. They got mixed up with regular humans, and what they left behind wasn't just predictions about the future or special signs, but actual kids. These kids who had one god parent and one human parent, the demigods, got born into a world that never really said they were okay, and that couldn't ever really hold them in. Some of them turned into kings, other ones turned into monsters, but just a few turned into legends. Their stories stuck around longer than Troy's walls did, or even longer than the temples of the gods who were their dads. The most well-known one of all these was Heracles, whose dad was Zeus and whose mom was Alcmene, a regular human queen who lived in Thebes. How he got made was a trick. Zeus came to Alcmene acting like he was her husband, and he made the night go on twice as long as a normal night. Because of this lie and trick, Heracles got born, and right from the start Hera's anger was hanging over him like a dark cloud. Because Hera, who was the queen way up in heaven, couldn't stand it when her husband cheated on her, and she made Heracles' whole life one big constant struggle and fight. When he was still just a tiny baby, she sent snakes to strangle him and kill him, and the baby grabbed them and strangled them dead with just his little bare hands. Heracles grew up and became a man with strength that was totally unbelievable. But it wasn't only his muscles and strength that made him into a legend. It was him trying to make up for something bad. When a crazy fit that the gods sent, Hera getting revenge again, took over him, he killed his wife and his kids. Feeling so sad and full of grief, he went to the oracle place at Delphi so he could get cleaned and made pure again. Right there, the oracle told him that he had to work for Eurystheus, who was a not very important king, and finish 12 super hard jobs, and each one was more impossible than the one before it. He wrestled a giant Nemean lion, and its skin couldn't get cut by any kind of knife or sword. He killed the Lernaean Hydra, burning every single one of its twisting necks so they couldn't grow back. He caught the Erymanthian boar, cleaned out the Augean stables in only one day, chased away the Stymphalian birds, and got control of the Cretan bull. He stole Hippolyta's special belt. She was the queen of the Amazons, grabbed Gerion's cows, got the golden apples from the Hesperides, and went all the way down into Hades to bring the three-headed dog Cerberus back. Every single job he did was way more than just showing how strong he was. There were times when he met death face to face, when he went to the edge of the whole world, and when he touched the very bottom heart of what it means for humans to suffer. By doing them, Heracles turned into more than just a hero. He turned into a symbol about regular people being able to keep going, about pain that you could get past if you worked really hard. When he died, poisoned by a robe that had been soaked in a centaur's blood, he built his own fire pile to burn on and climbed up on top of it, and he wasn't a regular human anymore. The gods brought him up to Olympus, where even Hera finally said okay, he could be a god. He turned into the only regular human who ever got to join the group of gods, a god who got made through terrible pain and suffering. But Heracles wasn't the first demigod, and he wasn't the only one whose story made what happened to regular people turn out different. Way long before him came Perseus, who was another son of Zeus, born to Danae, who got locked up in a bronze tower because of a prophecy that said her kid would kill her dad. But fate, once you get it started and moving, can't get locked away inside something. Zeus came to her not looking like a man, but as a shower of golden rain, and from them being together, Perseus got born. They got put in a chest and left out at sea, but the mom and kid didn't die and a nice fisherman took them in. But then again, a king wanting to have sex with someone, this time it was Polydex who wanted Danae, put Perseus in danger. He got ordered to go bring back Medusa's head, and she was a Gorgon whose stare turned men into solid stone. Perseus went on his quest and got help from the gods. Hermes handed him a sword, and Athena handed him a shield that was polished up shiny. He stole the eyeball from the Gree, who were old gray sisters who all shared just one eye, and he found out where the Gorgon lived. With Athena telling him what to do, he got close to Medusa while she was sleeping, using what he could see reflected in his shield so he could hit her without looking straight at her, and he chopped her head clean off. From her neck jumped out Pegasus, the horse with wings, and Chrysaor, a warrior made of gold. Perseus got away with help from them, and when he was traveling back, he saved Andromeda from a sea monster, married her, and started up royal family lines. His family line would keep going all the way to Heracles, connecting both their stories through blood and through fate. There were other people like them too, like Theseus, whose dad was either Poseidon or Aegeus depending on which way you hear the story told, and he killed the Minotaur inside the twisty maze at Knossos, which gave Athens its first little taste of having an empire. Bellerophon, who rode on Pegasus and killed the Chimera, but he flew way too high up and fell back down. Atalanta, who was raised by bears and could run as fast as the wind, and some people said she might be the daughter of Artemis herself. She raced against guys who wanted to marry her and killed a giant boar, but love and getting distracted beat her in the end. The demigods never got to just have peace and quiet. Their blood was too much like a god's for anybody to feel comfortable, and too much like a human's to last forever. The gods watched them feeling both proud and scared, because every single one tested where the line was between Olympus and Earth. And regular people worshipped them not only for when they won, but for how hard they struggled. They hurt, they bled, and sometimes they died. But when they did those things, they turned immortal in a way that the gods could never be, through the stories people told about them. As people's memory about Troy got fuzzier and went away, as cities got built and then fell down, the tales about these kids kept living on. They got shown in outdoor theaters and on temple walls, and people heard them echoing in poems and plays. And even though the gods stayed up on Olympus, far away and getting quieter and quieter, it was in the lives of their kids who got born from humans that humanity looked and saw itself. Messed up, brave, going to die, and totally amazing. In the world where Greeks told their myths, power wasn't only sitting in the hands of gods or heroes. There was something way older and way deeper, a force that was a piece of every choice you made, every death that happened, every time someone won, and every time someone felt sad. That force was called fate. It wasn't a god, but even the gods felt scared when they thought about it. It wasn't a law written down somewhere, but it controlled even the divine beings. Fate was something real and true, a force kind of like gravity that you couldn't see but you absolutely couldn't run away from, woven right into the cloth that the whole world got made out of. The Greeks gave it the name Mora, and sometimes it actually had faces you could see. The Morai, or in English we call them the Fates. They were three sisters who spun thread, measured how long it was, and chopped the thread of every single life. Clotho spun the thread, Lachesis measured out how long it should be, and Atropos, the one you couldn't change or argue with, cut it when the right time showed up. Even Zeus, who was the king way up on Olympus, had to do what they decided. He could get super mad and beg them not to, but if Atropos picked up her scissors, no power anywhere in heaven or down on earth could make her stop. So if fate was the boss of everything, what kind of hope did humans have? The answer came in omens and oracles, which were the weird and hard-to-understand messages from the gods and the signs that got sent to people who were brave enough to try reading them. The Greeks didn't think they could make their fates different, but they thought they could figure out what they meant. To look at the future was to get yourself ready for it, to try to prepare your soul for what was coming. The most well-known oracle in the whole entire country of Greece was at a place called Delphi, where Apollo talked through a lady called the Pythia, who sat on a three-legged stool over a crack in the temple floor that had steam coming out of it. She would suck in the steamy air, go into a trance where she wasn't really in control, and say the gods' words using puzzles and really short sentences. Kings, army generals, and just regular ordinary men all came to visit her. Some of them wanted to become famous, other ones just wanted to stay alive, but what she said was never clear and easy to understand. Apollo never gave answers that were straight and simple. A prophecy, just like a sword, could get understood in lots of different ways. Tons of stories got based on her mysterious predictions that nobody could figure out. Croesus, who was the king of Lydia, asked the oracle lady if he should start a war with the Persians. She told him that if he went across the river, he would destroy a huge big empire. He had no idea that the empire he'd destroy would be his very own. Oedipus also got told by her that he would murder his dad and marry his mom. His mom and dad tried to keep the prophecy from happening by leaving him out somewhere to die. He, when he found out about it, ran away from the people he thought were his home and family to keep it from coming true, but he ended up walking straight into his fate anyway. The Oracle Lady, just like always, was totally right. It was the humans not understanding what her words meant that made them end up doomed. There were other oracle places too besides that one. At a place called Dodona, the sound of special oak trees moving in the wind showed people what Zeus wanted. At Delos, which is where Leto had her babies Apollo and Artemis. At Ammon way over in Libya, and at millions of smaller holy places where dreams you had at night, guts from animals, birds flying through the air, or a flame going flicker got looked at as messages coming from stuff nobody knew about. When there was a war, people searched for omens before every single battle. A quick flash of lightning, a whole bunch of crows, somebody sneezing at the wrong moment. These weren't tiny little things that didn't matter. They were warnings, messages coming from the gods. An army general who didn't pay attention to them was risking more than just losing the fight, but getting punished by the gods too. People killed animals as sacrifices before boat trips across the sea, before babies got born, and before weddings. The insides of goats and the livers from oxen got looked at really carefully by seers, who were people trying to figure out what the gods wanted by staring at the dark, wet patterns in the muscles and blood. Being able to read omens turned into a power all by itself. Seers like Calchas, who showed the Greeks which way to go at Troy, or Tiresias, the blind guy who could see the future in Thebes, had just as much influence over things as kings did. Tiresias especially, who had been alive as both a man and a woman, people said had been alive for 7 whole generations. How wise and smart he was couldn't be beaten by anybody, and sometimes his visions were like a curse to the people who asked him for them. But oracles and omens weren't just silly beliefs that weren't true. They stood for something way deeper, the Greek belief that regular humans weren't the ones in control. It didn't matter how strong the hero was, how noble and good the family was, how loyal your heart beat inside you, the wheel of fate always kept turning around. And while it was turning, sooner or later everything would get broken. The gift of being able to see prophecy wasn't power, it was just knowing about it. And knowing about it, when it came way too late, was usually the same exact thing as tragedy. But still, men went out looking for prophecy anyway. They climbed up paths on mountains to get to Delphi, they brought gold and goat blood with them, and they asked questions while their voices shook. Because even if fate couldn't get changed into something different, it could get faced and looked at straight on. To know that a storm was heading your way wasn't going to stop the storm, but maybe it would let you die with your eyes wide open instead of closed. In this tightness between knowing stuff and not being able to do anything about it, between what you knew and what scared you, the Greeks found what things meant. Their stories weren't about beating destiny and making it lose, but about having dignity and respect for yourself while you were inside it. Even the gods looked at the loom where the fates worked, and they couldn't cut the threads they didn't like. Hector knew he was going to die, and he still strapped on his armor. Achilles knew he wasn't going to come back alive, and he still got on a boat and sailed to Troy. Oedipus tried to run away from his doom, and instead ran straight smack into it. And the Pythia lady kept breathing year after year, whispering puzzles into the smoke, and her voice was the cold breath of a world that had already decided what was going to happen. To the ancient Greeks who lived long ago, death wasn't where a story ended, it was just where life ended. What came after it wasn't heaven or hell like we think about it nowadays, but a place that was more in the middle and more ancient and old. It was a land under the dirt where all the dead people, big important ones and small unimportant ones, good ones and bad ones, went on their last trip. This place was called Hades, and it got named after the god who was the boss of it. And even though it didn't have any fire flames, didn't have any pitchforks, and didn't have any demons with horns, people were so scared of it that regular humans almost never said the god's name out loud. Instead of that, they called him Plauton, which means the rich one, because all the valuable stuff, all the silver and gold, came from under the ground, and the dead people came from there too. How the underworld was set up wasn't based on what made sense logically, but on myths and things people remembered. Right at the entrance to it were 5 rivers. Styx, which was the river of hating people and promises that were really serious. Acheron, which was the river of feeling sad. Phlegethon, which was the river made of fire. Cocytus, which was the river of crying and wailing, and Lethe, which was the river that made you forget stuff. Every single one wasn't just a thing you had to cross physically, but a spiritual line you were crossing too. The dead people showed up looking like shadows, and the Greek word for them was psyche, and they didn't have any breath or any blood, no voice or any shape, and they crossed over into Hades with some help from Charon, who was the ferryman guy. If you gave him one coin, he would row you across the Acheron River. People who didn't get buried the right way and couldn't pay him had to be left walking around on the shores for 100 years, making whispering sounds and crying. Once you got inside, the souls ran into Cerberus, who was the dog with 3 heads who kept the dead people in and kept the living people out. Past him were the plains of Asphodel, which was a gray and not very bright place, where most souls just drifted around in a state where they forgot everything and stayed quiet, making noises like when dry leaves blew around. But not every single fate was the same. The underworld had people who were its judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, and they judged every single soul. The really truly evil ones got thrown down into Tartarus, which was a pit where you get tortured that was even deeper down than where the Titans got locked up. Right there, people who had broken promises they made, done murders, or betrayed other people had to suffer punishments that matched up with what bad stuff they did. Sisyphus had to roll his rock up a hill forever. Tantalus was thirsty, forever right next to water he could never get to drink. And Ixion spun around and around on his wheel that was on fire. The very, very few people who got thought of as good enough for a reward went to a place called the Elysian Fields, which was like paradise with soft, gentle winds, green grass fields, and it was always springtime. Right there, heroes could live feeling comfortable, with their memories still in their heads and the great things they did still getting honored. An even tinier number of souls could pick to get reborn, going through the Lethe River to forget about their past lives and get the cycle started all over again. In religious groups that came later on that had mysteries, a soul could even hope to escape from this whole cycle completely and go up to the stars. But these kinds of fates were super rare and weren't promised to anybody for sure. Right in the middle of this whole kingdom was Hades himself, serious and quiet, a king who didn't act proud. He didn't ask people to worship him, and he didn't get all mixed up in what regular humans were doing. He just ruled, and when he ruled, he had total, complete power. His kingdom never changed, and he liked it being that way. He wasn't evil, like myths that came later would say he was, but he was stuck in one place and didn't care about stuff, like the shadow that gets made by Zeus's storm and Poseidon's ocean waves. And standing right by his side was Persephone, who was the queen of the underworld, and her story, maybe more than any other story, shows the weird double-sidedness of death in how Greeks thought about it. Persephone was Demeter's daughter, and Demeter was the goddess of plants you harvest. One day in spring, while she was out picking flowers, the ground opened wide up and Hades came out in his chariot. He grabbed her real fast and she didn't say it was okay, and he took her down to his kingdom. Demeter, because she felt so sad and full of grief, made the earth dry all up. Crops stopped growing, rivers dried up into nothing, and not having enough food spread all across the land. Not one prayer could get her to change her mind. She wasn't going to let the world turn green again until somebody gave her daughter back. Finally, Zeus sent Hermes to go get Persephone, but because she had eaten some pomegranate seeds, 6 of them, or maybe it was just 1, she was stuck connected to Hades now. The middle ground agreement they came to turned into the myth that explains the seasons. Persephone would spend part of the year down in the underworld, and while those months were happening, Demeter would feel grief and the world would get cold. When Persephone came back, the earth would bloom with flowers and plants. Life and death turned into a circle that goes around and around, not something final that ends once. As time went by, Persephone's job changed. She wasn't just someone who got grabbed and held captive anymore. She turned into a ruler who had her own power, a queen of secret mysteries who walked around among the ghost shadows with quiet power and control. In the Eleusinian mysteries, which were the huge secret ceremonies that got held outside Athens, her going down and her coming back up got acted out every single year, making a promise not just that the grain would come back, but also giving hope that the soul could start over again. The underworld wasn't totally closed and locked off. A small number of regular humans went there and stayed alive so they could tell people about it. Orpheus sang his songs to get past Cerberus, and he charmed both Hades and Persephone with his music, but then he lost Eurydice when he looked backward at the wrong time. Heracles dragged Cerberus up to the surface world. Odysseus, who got instructions from Circe, killed an animal as a sacrifice for the dead people and called up the ghosts of Tiresias, Achilles, and Agamemnon so he could talk to them. Every one of them told him that being dead wasn't glorious and great, it was just final and over. It's better to be a slave who's alive than to be a king who's with the dead ghost shadows, Achilles said, and he used to be the best and greatest of all the Greeks. And so the Greeks built their grave tombs really carefully. They put dead people in the ground with coins for giving to Charon, with weapons, wine, and songs. They poured drinks out and gave offerings at the family fireplace in their home, because the dead people were never really totally gone. They showed up in dreams to haunt you, they sent clues and signs, and sometimes, if you did special ceremonies and used blood, you could even call them back to get answers to questions that probably should have stayed unknown. The underworld was like a mirror that reflected life, that showed memory, that showed justice that you couldn't argue against or appeal. It didn't give a heaven for people who had faith, and it didn't give a hell for people who didn't have faith. It just was there, huge and dark, ruled by a god who didn't want love or prayers, who just wanted silence. In that quietness and stillness, the Greeks saw what eternity looked like. And in the stories they told about Hades and Persephone, about shadows and getting judged, about rivers and thrones that were under the dirt, they gave death its spot in the universe, not like it was a punishment, but like it was a passageway you went through. Even the gods don't live forever, not in what people remember, not in their power, and not in people worshipping them. A time comes in every mythic circle and pattern when the divine gets quiet, when figures that used to be so bright and clear fade away from people's dreams, and thrones that got built once in thunder get worn down smooth by time passing. For the gods up on Olympus, this slow going downhill started not with a war or with a prophecy, but with Rome, and with a world that had gotten tired and sick of the old stories. The Romans didn't wreck and destroy the Greek gods. They took them in and adopted them, gave them brand new names, and built their myths right into Roman values and the places they conquered. Zeus turned into Jupiter, Hera turned into Juno, Poseidon turned into Neptune, and so on down the list. This was a change that was both planned out carefully and done with respect. Rome thought Olympus was grand and great, but it changed the gods so they'd fit better with its own big ideas: order, levels of who's in charge, and having an empire. Jupiter didn't make thunder from a wild mountain top, but from the Capitoline Hill, looking like someone who makes laws. How wild Dionysus was turned into Bacchus, who was more polished and refined, and Athena's fierce way of being independent got made softer into Minerva's wisdom about the city. In books and writing, the myths kept on living. Ovid, in his book called Metamorphoses, told the old tales again in beautiful Latin language, a lot of times with irony and always with skill at poetry. Virgil in the Aeneid made the gods into people working for fate, pulling the strings behind how Rome got founded and started. But something had gotten different. In Homer's books and writing, the gods walked around on the battlefield, open about what they felt strongly about. You could see them in the dust and blood. In Roman myths, they had turned into symbols, far away, and about politics. They didn't mess around and interfere as much anymore. They had turned into themes more than actual real beings who were there. And while the Roman Empire got bigger and bigger, it ran into brand new gods and brand new ideas. From the east came Mithras, a god who got born from a rock and who killed huge bulls that were cosmic and magical. From Egypt came Isis, who was the mother of magic and life, and she was all wrapped up in silk and secrets. From Judea came one single god you couldn't see, one who said you can't make pictures of him, who looked down on statues and idols, and who had no space for god brothers and sisters or kings who threw around lightning bolts. These brand new religious groups didn't just compete and try to beat the Olympians. They knocked down and undermined the whole entire foundation of what Greeks believed. While the old gods ruled by wanting stuff and by having levels of who's in charge, these brand new faiths gave moral stuff that was clear, gave unity where everyone was together, and gave salvation and getting saved. At the same time, philosophy started making the mythic world weaker from the inside. Thinkers like Xenophanes had been making fun for a long time of the idea that gods looked like humans, saying that if oxen had gods, those gods would look like oxen too. Plato thought the beauty of myths was great, but he had doubts about whether they were actually literally true, saying that the gods have to be perfect and good, not the jealous and lusty figures who argued up on Olympus. Epicurus said that the gods were real and existed, but they weren't interested in what humans did, and that being scared of divine punishment was a superstition that people should just dump and abandon. Even Stoicism, with its super strict code about what's right and wrong, saw divinity not in figures you could see, but in reason itself, the logos that was the boss of everything. By the time the imperial cult showed up and started, when emperors got declared to be divine and altars got built for men who were just regular mortals, the line between myth and politics had gotten totally blurred and mixed up. The gods from the old days turned into symbols. People kept their temples around more because of tradition than because they believed. Farmers still put out offerings for Demeter, and sailors still said prayers to Poseidon, but way fewer people really truly believed that the gods walked around among them. The flame up on Olympus hadn't gone out yet, but it was burning really low and weak. And then the final hit came, not from a religious group that was competing with them, but from a revolution about faith. Christianity, which at first was just a small group that got picked on and hurt, started spreading all across the empire, and it got carried not by swords but by words. Its God couldn't be seen, was only one single God, and had all the power there was. Its stories weren't about boyfriends and girlfriends and getting revenge, but about doing bad things called sin and getting saved called salvation. As time went on, its temples took the place of the old ones. Its hymns and religious songs were louder and drowned out the liars. Its priests said the Olympians were demons or just made-up fake stuff. By the time Theodosius I was ruling, pagan temples got closed by actual law, the Olympic Games got stopped and abolished, and the ceremonies where you sacrifice things got made illegal. The gods didn't fight back against this. There was no final war between Zeus and Christ, no divine attacking and surrounding of Jerusalem or Rome. The Olympians just faded away like when the last bit of light goes away at the end of a really long day. Their statues stood there all weathered by wind and rain and silent. Their altars got cold. The marble columns got cracks in them, and ivy plants grew where priests used to stand. The myth stayed around, but as books and literature, not as faith that people believed. Kids learned about Heracles in schools, not in shrines and holy places. Artists painted pictures of Athena, but they didn't say prayers to her. The gods who had once been in charge of storms and fates were now just stories, beautiful, strange, and haunting like ghosts. And still, they kept going and endured. Even while their temples fell down into rubble and crumbled, they kept living on in whispers, in poetry, and in how the Western world imagined things. They came back in Renaissance paintings, in Enlightenment philosophy, in romantic long epic poems, and in modern ways of telling the stories again. They turned into archetypes which are patterns of war and wisdom, of love and betraying people, of pride and glory. The Greeks had given them human faces, and when they did that, they had made them eternal in a way that was different. Even though the temples fell and the oracles became silent, the myths of Olympus did not die. They became echoes, quiet at first, like a distant lyre being played in the wind, then louder as time went on and the world started to listen again. Because myths, unlike kingdoms, are not limited by stone and swords. They live on in the world of imagination, and there, the gods have always found a way to come back. During the long centuries when Christianity was dominant in Europe, the gods were not worshipped, but they were not forgotten either. Monks and scholars copied ancient texts, sometimes reluctantly, preserving the works of Homer, Hesiod, Euripides, and Sophocles, even as they criticized the beliefs these works once supported. The old stories survived not in temples, but in libraries, hidden between sermons and treatises, waiting. And then came along the Renaissance, which was a really big turning point when Europe looked backward at the past so it could move forward into the future. In the fancy courts of Florence, in the religious chapels of Rome, and in the brains of smart thinkers like Petrarch and Erasmus, The gods came back up and rose again, not as religious deities you worship, but as symbols that showed human nature. Painters drew and painted pictures of Aphrodite standing in seashells and surrounded by light. Sculptors made statues and gave Apollo his bow and his grace and beauty. Poets called out to the muse once again one more time. Myth got reborn and came back to life in marble and canvas, not on altars where you burn incense and stuff. The gods didn't rule the sky anymore, but they were in charge and reigned in art. In the Age of Enlightenment, which is when people used reason a lot, reason challenged superstition and stuff people believed without proof, and yet the myths kept going and endured. They got studied, translated into different languages, and analyzed. To Voltaire, they were allegories, which are stories with hidden meanings. To Goethe, they were reflections of the soul. Romanticism came next and followed, and with it, people went back to emotions, to tragic stuff, and to things that were sublime and amazing. Writers looked back to Oedipus and Antigone, to Orpheus and Eurydice, and they found in them questions that never get old and are timeless. What is fate? What is love? What does it mean to be human? Then the modern age showed up and came. Myth wasn't just something for classical studies classes anymore. It popped up and appeared in literature, in movies, in psychology where you study the mind, and even in comic books. Carl Jung saw the gods as archetypes, which are patterns in the human mind that show up over and over again constantly. James Joyce wove them and put them into the streets of Dublin. Rick Riordan reimagined them and made them new for schoolchildren living in Manhattan. In Marvel and DC Comics, the gods walked around again, not wearing robes and sandals, but wearing armor and spandex. And always in the background, the old tales stayed the same and remained unchanged. Odysseus was still sailing on his boat. Heracles was still doing his hard labor. Persephone still rose up and came back each spring. They didn't get forgotten. They just got translated from one generation to another generation into new forms, new languages, and new dreams. Because myth isn't static, which means stuck in one place. It's a living memory that gets shaped by the people who carry it. What the Greeks gave us wasn't just a group of gods, but a framework, which is a structure, a way to explain the world, to deal with death, to honor beauty, and to understand ourselves. Their gods had flaws and messed up, yes, but they did it gloriously and in amazing ways. In them, we saw not perfection, which is being perfect, but potential, which is what we could become. The agony of choice, which means the pain of choosing, the thrill of risk, which means excitement from danger, the pain of pride, and the comfort of ritual, which are ceremonies you do over and over. They told us what we could become and what we should be scared of and fear. Even right now, in a world that has science and silence, the myths still whisper and talk quietly. You can hear them in stories about chosen heroes who get picked, in stars that fall down, and in the slow changing of the seasons as they go from one to another. A girl goes down into the underworld, and spring waits and doesn't come yet. A king fights against and defies a prophecy and loses everything he has. A mother grieves and cries for the son. The faces change and are different, but the truths stay the same and do not change. The gods might have left Mount Olympus, but they never truly left us and went away from us. They walk quietly now in books and songs, in dreams people have and memories people remember, in every story that dares to look beyond the mortal world where humans live. They aren't dead. They have just simply moved to a different place. And now the story ends and finishes. The winds on Mount Olympus are cold and chilly. The torches in Delphi are ashes and burnt out. But the myths remain and stay with us.